Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my loyal servant driving up on his electric cart right now to deliver me a nice present. It's Matt Trashcan Freeman. How's it going, Trashy?
Oh, it's going great, sir. I've just got something right here for you.
Oh,
it's a set of golf clubs. Yep.
Well, so is that where it's not going to be a nuke? It's just going to be a set of golf clubs.
I mean,
that's the whole intro joke.
I was at a golf course that got this golf cart here, so I got some golf clubs.
You just thought I would want some new clubs.
Yeah,
man, you are the best.
Well, thank you.
Who says evil defeats itself? I think it charms itself. Thank you.
This is great. High five.
This week on the show, Climax. We are discussing chapters 67 through 73 of Stephen King's The Stand. Nadine escapes Flagg's clutches as our Free Zone Fellowship, minus Gandalf, who fell, makes it to Vegas and the confrontation that awaits them. In the end, our good guys fear no evil, but Randy Flagg should have, as Trashcan Man arrives just in time for the hand of God itself to show up and activate a nuke. Oh boy, Matt. Oh boy, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff that happens this week. We kind of sprint towards the finish line here.
We really.
What'd you think? What'd you think of it?
Well, as you say, a lot of plot happened in a relatively short period of time. Like as I was going through, making notes for this week, I was like, whoa, like this is like 3 normal weeks of material that we're gonna have to cram in. And it's gonna. And honestly, I'm like, how are we gonna cover this in a single episode, because there's so much, not only did so much stuff happened, but it feels like this sort of theological thesis that the book is making really came to a point of clarity, and we can have some conversations that we probably couldn't have had before because certain things were ambiguous up until now, where now they feel like, okay, well, that's how this happened, so now we can talk about that. So I'm interested to talk about that. I'm interested to talk about obviously the plot and certain characters, dying and their arcs obviously ending. So yeah, just wow, the big deal. I see why people talk about this book.
Yeah, I do too. And I, as I tweeted about earlier in the week, I think this climax in particular is wonderful. And there are people that don't like it, and we can maybe talk about that as we get to the specific things that people don't like. But I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, me too.
All right, before we get into it real quick, we do have just a couple of quick announcements. I'm doing this one just so people will stop emailing me about it. We are still working on the Do the King Thing contest. We have made significant progress in taking the 5 dozen entries we got and distilling that down to a reasonable number that we could actually realistically have our patrons read and vote on. We are close to being done with that, but we are not quite there. We're busy, folks. We got full-time jobs and this job and families, and we're working on it. I promise we're working on it.
It's all in good fun, folks.
So yeah, just please have patience with us. It will happen definitely before the end of season 2. So I've just given us a month.
Great.
But it will happen. We're working on it.
Yep.
One more announcement, right, Matt?
One more announcement. This week, actually, we're going to be doing a Doofcast episode over on our other podcast feed, covering The Rings of Power, the new Amazon TV show, which Scott and I have now watched in its entirety, and we have in its first season entirety, I guess, and we have things to say about it.
We have many things to say. Many things.
Yes.
If you enjoy Matt's incessant Lord of the Rings related rants on this show, oh boy, it's going to be a full hour of it. So
yeah. Although, it'll be funny because I'm probably going to be like, this kind of reminds me of how, like, in The Stand.
I mean, that's what, I'm reading Watership Down for a book club right now, and I'm constantly making references to Stephen King. I mean, it's very clear that this book was very important to him. So.
Not just for The Stand specifically, actually, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen King at large, but also, yes, very, very Stand specific. I understand why he references Watership Down in his novel so many times.
Me too.
Because, God, there's so much, for sure. Yeah. All right, without further ado, let's get right into our 6 seven chapters we have to cover over the next 2 hours. We'll begin with chapter 67. This chapter begins with Flagg arriving back in Vegas with his bride. He's confident that everything is going well. Everything is great. He's got his bride. She's with child, and everything's going great for Randall Flagg. Nothing to worry about at all, right? Nothing at all to worry about.
No. I love how everyone's shocked and horrified at Nadine's appearance. It feels like there's this real vibe shift when Flagg shows up with Nadine, and just I don't know, her condition is so disturbing to everyone that it really. Mm-hmm. For me anyway, maybe it's an artifact sort of the way we broke up the reading, but it felt like just her mere appearance was enough to sort of cause this psychological shift against Flagg to begin.
Yeah, I like that. That's really interesting because, like, you know, they're afraid of him. They see him as this mythological creature, but then Nadine shows up and she's this catatonic woman with bright white hair, and it's just completely disarming to them in a way. Like, oh, I didn't realize I was like, there's a moment where you can be like, oh, I didn't realize I was in like Bible shit, and now like suddenly I'm in something bigger than I thought I was in, and that the uncomfortableness of that realization on a lot of people, I think, is definitely part of this. Yeah,
I mean, it seems like he might have hidden some of his more overt demonic nature for most people most of the time. Stuff like the crucifixions, you can sort of read that as like, okay, well, it's a little bit overzealous, but it's fundamentally a punishment, right? It's a way of executing somebody. But this is like, okay, this is just weird evil magic.
So, yeah, definitely. So meanwhile, Lloyd is being the good little number 2 he is, and is following up on Julie Lowry's information she gave to him last week, albeit a bit too late to do anything about it, right? He finds out that Nick Andros is on a red list, and that would have been great information, but he can't do anything about it. I do like this little detail here, Matt, where the people of Vegas have phones again, which is wild. The thing they did right after they got the power up is they got the phone lines working again, which is pretty big deal. But the thing I love about it, I love that the lines are not very good. The communication is difficult. You have to, it's a bad connection. You have to talk loud. Communicating via these phones is difficult. And I wonder if it's like overall like a large metaphor for communication in Vegas in general is, you think it's good because you brought this technology back, but we're actually not communicating very well at all.
That's a really great point. I mean, because basically exactly as you point out, like, the telephones work, but the fundamental thing that could have actually averted the disaster is not communicated because people aren't talking to each other, people aren't sharing information, people aren't trusting each other. Flagg's not trusting his number 1 lieutenant, who he should absolutely be trusting. And despite the fact that you literally have somebody whose full-time job it is to be the telephone operator, which is a thing that used to exist, it doesn't help.
Yeah. And that's a really great point because, like we said, the thing we learn here is that Flagg has a red list that he has communicated to one of these people that he has not communicated to Lloyd. So he mentions the name Nick Andros, and the guy immediately says, "Oh, that guy's on my red list." That's one of the big wigs of the enemy that I was told to keep track of, and Lloyd doesn't know about it. And of course, it's important to the plot that both Flagg chose to do this, but also that Lloyd realizes he chose to do this because it fills him with doubt again. He went into this week's reading kind of like confident in Flagg that everything was going to be okay. He's got a total handle on things. Yeah, these 2 spies escaped, but look, he's back and everything's going to be okay. And then it's like immediately like, oh wait, I don't know if he has a handle on things actually, and is he going to get rid of me? Am I the guy actually, if he's keeping secrets from me? And it's just like, it's wonderful watching how these power structures built on fear completely collapse,
Yeah, exactly. Lloyd is afraid he's being edged out, which is funny because he's not. It kind of seems like Flagg didn't even have a good reason for it.
He says he can't remember a little bit later, right? He's just like, I don't remember why I did that. Whatever.
Yeah. Which to me is funnier than like, I distrust Lloyd. It's just like there was no good reason, but because he's so terrifying, now Lloyd is paranoid, which is just another chink in the armor. It's great. Yeah.
So Lloyd is now summoned by Flagg, where he gets to meet the comatose Nadine. And I wanted to talk about this part a bit here. So obviously Nadine is so comatose that she's still like there. She's responding to orders, like he says specifically, put your hand up to shake Lloyd's hand, and then she just creepily leaves it up there. And we get this part. You can put your hand down now, my love, Flagg said. Nadine put her hand back in her lap, where it began to twist and squirm. Lloyd realized with something like horror that she was masturbating. So what was your reaction to this? This is incredibly disturbing, right?
Well, my reaction, I'm sorry to say, is probably predictable. That it's just interesting how pervasive the sort of duality of sexuality has pervaded. Use that word again, throughout all of King's works, even to this very early one, even before this very early one. I think even to Salem's Lot, and possibly even Carrie, we saw this idea where like there are beautiful and life-affirming things about sexuality, and there are sort of nihilistic, purely self-centered, destructive aspects to sexuality, and it's like whatever, like Nadine has sort of been through this sort of the utmost, most horrible, cursed manifestation of what we sometimes call like the pink side of sexuality, the evil, lustful aspect of things, and now she's catatonic, and like her hands are just masturbating because that's all she can do, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if like it's like, she's got like default, idle programming from Flagg now. Like he's ripped everything out of her mind and her soul, and he like put in like, and the default operating system of her is to just do that when she's not doing anything else, which shows just like that all Flagg sees her as is a tool and a vehicle for sex, right? That's it. So when she's just idling on the couch, what's she going to be doing? Oh, she's going to be masturbating. She's going to be doing this because this is all she is worth to me as a sexual item, as a vehicle for pleasure and for procreation. And so, you won't raise your hand to shake someone else's hand on automatically. You have to do that on demand, but your automatic function is to just masturbate because that's all you are.
Yeah,
horrifying.
I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, I like that. Or you could even just say like all of the other parts of her, all of the sort of human parts have been frightened away into the dark recesses of her mind, or whatever, and so all that's really left is those impulses that you just described.
Yeah. Either way, I think it's horrifying and disturbing and terrible, and as much as we struggle with Nadine as a human being, I feel so bad for her in this moment. It's awful.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not like Lloyd stops being a good servant to Flagg, but he does from pretty much this point on, between this encounter with Nadine and being worried about the Red List, he starts to be, at least in his own mind, more afraid of Flagg and less like gung-ho in terms of want to follow this guy because he's the boss and he's going to lead us to victory. I think for Lloyd and maybe for some of the others, it becomes more like I'm going to follow him because I'm terrified of him, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, God is sending Lloyd so many boats. He's stuck on the roof in the flood, and he's being sent so many boats, so many moments of, oh, this guy doesn't have control. Oh, this guy's actually terrible. Oh, like I don't actually owe this man anything. And yet Lloyd just continuously turns them away. And to his doom, we'll see.
I think you're right.
So Lloyd tells Flagg both about the spy, who they are still confident that they can catch using their helicopters, but also about the Trashcan Man problem. Flagg orders Trash's death next time he sees him, and we get once again, it's like it's fine. We have the helicopters; they're definitely going to find Tom Cullen. That'll be fine. Also, next time we see Trashcan Man, we're going to kill him, and that'll be fine. Which is actually like, I mean, once again, man, like it doesn't pay to be a henchman. Like you're just going to get killed. Like even if you do a good job, you're going to get killed. If you do a bad job, you're definitely going to get killed. Like the benefits must be crazy because I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they are. I mean, it's interesting because, he promised Trash that he would be, at the head of his artillery, right? And in that moment, at that stage in the book, it felt like, oh, he really understands what he has on his hands with Trash. Like he understands that this is a guy who's supernaturally useful at weaponry, but he's a dangerous tool. He's somebody who should be treated with respect and care and caution, and all of that kind of self-assured confidence and control over the situation is just gradually ebbed away to the point where he's like, oh, he's doing things that I didn't want him to do. Okay, I guess we have to kill him now.
Yeah.
Even though he's this incredibly useful, potentially useful weapon.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially since he said, I was thinking back to that first chapter where he's like, you will be at the front of my vanguard. Like you will be, like I'm going to elevate, and really what has Trashcan done this entire book? He's done like the just driven out into the desert to find weapons and like helped other people. Like he's not really been granted any actual power or like the respect he has is earned respect from the people around him. That he earned himself, that has nothing. Flagg didn't do anything for him, really. He just brought him here and just set him loose. God, a Trashcan Man story is so sad to me. It's such a tragedy.
Yeah, I guess just slightly meta from the point is like Flagg seems to be deteriorating. Maybe we talked about this a little bit last week, but the idea that Flagg seems to be getting worse, like in every way. Like he seems to be making worse decisions. He can't remember stuff that he did before. Yeah, I think last week what we talked about was like he couldn't remember his life before the plague.
Yeah.
Now it's like he can't even remember stuff that he did a few days ago. He's sort of effectively becoming dumber and more impulsive. I guess I'm just putting a pin in that because there's going to be a few things he does this week on the way to his end that are like just sort of boneheaded, and you're like, wait, this was the guy who was the big scary big bad of the story, who was this demonic all-seeing eye of Sauron, and this is one example of that, obviously.
Definitely. I agree. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a few minutes, actually. So as we said, everything's fine. Everything's fine for our bad guys, except, oops, no, it isn't, because Trashcan also put explosives in both helicopters, and they were triggered to explode when the engines were turned on. So on their way out to search for Tom, both helicopters explode in the middle of the desert, killing all trained pilots in Vegas, ending the threat of free zone bombing runs once and for all. There's nobody left that can fly these things. They have some pilots in training, but there's nobody to teach them. And so that threat is, in one foul swoop, just completely thrown off the board. It's shocking, isn't it?
It is. It's very fun. Finding out that the helicopter's been blown up along with all the pilots. It's the most fantastic moment of relief and I think hilarity too. It's not like it's the end of Vegas quite yet, but it's such a dramatic reversal that Flagg's now entirely on the back foot. You're like, oh my God, how's he going to recover from this?
Yeah, and he even says, like, from here, it's just like, oh, we'll just hop in some tanks. We have tanks, and we'll just drive out to Boulder. We can be there in a few weeks and just wipe them out once and for all. And then he's immediately like, well, it's mid-September. The mountain passages might be snowed up already. So, our tanks will get caught in the mud. The old Napoleon and Hitler trap where they try to invade Russia in the winter and just fucking die. And so, like, yeah, it's amazing that just this one thing, and this thing. I actually think this book is a very cleverly intricate puzzle in a lot of ways, because like you have all these questions, and I see people when they talk about this book sometimes ask questions about like the question we were asking: why did these spies have to go down here? What did they do? What did they accomplish? Right? And we say, well, if you look at it, a lot of this is part of building doubt in Flagg as a leader and as a person. Part of it is diminishing his power through this doubt, because it seems like he gets power vaguely through his ability to manipulate and control people. And then stuff like this where, okay, well, Tom goes, and then Tom manages to elude him because of apparently his mental disability allows it so the Flagg's eye can't see him. So he's able to elude him. He's able to escape. And so therefore they have to use the helicopters to go look for him. And it's turning on the helicopters that activates the bomb. And so it's Tom being there and leaving there is what got these helicopters blown up. And you can kind of see how the pieces start to like connect in really satisfying ways, I think. And I think this continues all the way through the end of the story with the nuke. I think you can see how each person played a role in this whole thing. And the role is not like a direct role, not necessarily a specific action they were doing or accomplishing, but they play a role. And I love that.
Yeah. And also I get one thing I wanted to say definitely at some point, and this is just as good a time as any, is I feel like the way King has structured this whole section of the book is intentionally meant to make it so that you're sure that Flagg is going to lose almost from the beginning. Mm-hmm. It's just one piece of bad news after another for Flagg. That this whole section, right? It's it's as if instead of building up toward the question of like, is Frodo going to be able to destroy the ring, or is Frodo going to die and then the army is going to be destroyed in front of the Black Gates and everybody's going to lose, and we're building toward this moment of intense uncertainty. Instead, it's as if like all of the Nazgul were killed in a freak accident like 50 pages before that, and then Sauron like stubbed his toe, and then like it's
I mean, to quote the Dark Tower, it's like Sauron got food poisoning, right? Because I mean, like that, this, you're absolutely right here, and this is, I think, something that King does time and time again, and we did see it in the Dark Tower. We saw it with Mordred, right? The final confrontation with Mordred was this thing that was built up, and by the time Mordred gets there, he's basically already defeated himself, and that is exactly what happens here. By the time our heroes get to Vegas for their final stand, their final confrontation, the enemy has basically already shot itself in the foot, and they're kind of there just to put the other bullet in the other foot, or some horrible metaphor, but you know what I mean.
No, because by the time they arrive, there's this feeling of like peace. You're like, oh, it's fait accompli. They're gonna win. I just want to see how.
Yep.
And I think that's totally intentional. It's just pointing out the clear distinction between how this could have been written, right? It could have been written as extremely tense, like, oh my God, the heroes are going to die. It's all going to be over. And then at the last second, Trash shows up with the nuke, and then that's it. It's like, no, that was the last, like you said, that was the last thing that needed to happen. That wasn't, that was by no means the only thing that needed to happen.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get to it, because I mean, it is still literally a Deus Ex Machina, right? It is literally that, but it's not like all hope is lost and then suddenly the hand of God appears. It's like almost a sigh of relief when you go, oh, this is how. And I think Larry, we're jumping way ahead, but I think Larry captures that perfectly when he's just like, oh, thank God. Like this is how. I understand now. I see now, and this is it. And you're right that it was never a doubt how it was going to happen. Just exactly how. And the relief of the knowledge of that moment is felt by us and by the characters in it, I think.
Yep.
So moving back to this chapter, though, there are several moments in this chapter where we see Tom heading east. The book kind of jumps back to him on his journey. We're not going to talk about each one of them because, as you said, we have so much to talk about this week. But I want to talk specifically about Nick Andros and how he appears to Tom in his dreams, guiding him, talking to him, right? Audibly talking to him. This is fun dream magic stuff. This is the point where I remind you that Mother Abigail said last week or the week before that there maybe was a little something left of Nick Andros, right? And that he was dead and gone, but there was a little bit of him left, and maybe that's what this is, right? This is Jesus Christ, Nick Andros himself, here to appear before Tom and literally guide him. And the book kind of doesn't hide the fact that this is not just like Tom, like taking this weird message from the white he's getting and like transforming it into Nick Andros to help him better process it, because there's that moment where he says he can't wait to see Nick in Boulder when he gets back there, and the ghost Nick like turns away and doesn't want to acknowledge him. So it's like, oh, so this is actually Nick Andros, like that's who it is. Really, really interesting stuff. What was your reaction to it.
Yeah. I agree with what you just said there, that this is actually Nick. And in fact, if we're going to continue along the thread of saying like everything had to happen the way it happened, otherwise everything wouldn't have gone well. If Nick hadn't died, then I think these extremely important messages wouldn't have been delivered to Tom. There wouldn't have been the right messenger to send them, you could say.
Sure.
And then Tom would have been caught. And then if Tom were caught, then maybe the attack on Flagg wouldn't have gone off correctly. Or, I mean, I have this theory at this point that Tom is going to find Stu, and help him get back to Boulder. So like that's also another important role that Tom will have to serve. So again, there's kind of this domino effect where it's sad that Nick had to die, but if he hadn't died, then this wouldn't have happened, and then this other thing couldn't have happened. And it's like a perfect sort of examination of the idea of, well, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and who can possibly say the consequences of X action.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. That's great. So we go back to Flagg now, and I wanted to talk about this thing Flagg says to himself. He said he could not have explained why it was so important to have him, Tom. The rationality of the problem constantly eluded him. More and more he felt the urge to simply act, to move, to do, to destroy. So I love this because, Glenn has said again and again, and I think, as you said, aligns with Tolkien pretty perfectly, that the Dark Man is the last bastion of rationality, of this concept, this Tolkien defined concept of rationality. But it seems like now rationality itself is literally abandoning him. And I'm curious, what do you think that says about evil and about, the King's view on rationality and evil and these things?
Yeah, so the rationality or the rationalism that Tolkien and I think, like you said, King are complaining about through their works is generally rooted in a belief that everything can be known and understood through the exercise of reason. In other words, it is a denial or rejection of knowledge from any other source other than the rational faculties. And then this would, of course, include sources of knowledge like intuition or even feelings and emotions, which are, part of just being human. So it's a sort of denial of the very basic day-to-day existence of what it is to be human, which involves a lot of, emotionality and feeling and the importance of that. I think when it comes to Flagg, I think to the extent that Flagg even recognizes emotions ever, from his own point of view, it's really only, fear, maybe sometimes disgust, lust, anger, maybe hate sometimes. I don't think he even cares about anybody enough to hate them. It's more these sort of shallow negative emotions, never anything positive, right? And then on top of that, he just has this cold, calculating approach to the world because he doesn't have any of these positive feelings that sort of anchor him to humanity. And I think maybe what King is saying is that there's only so far that you can get with that way of thinking. Like you can't really, for example, you can't really lead people without an understanding of the full range of human feeling and emotion.
Sure.
Humans, are capable of rationality, and you can sort of persuade us using rational arguments, but we aren't really rational. You have to understand how to inspire us. You have to understand how to lead using tools other than fear and lust and the standard bag of tricks that we see him use throughout the whole book. Again, it's weird to me because I don't necessarily think of any of the stuff that Flagg does as fitting comfortably under the umbrella of rationality. But I think I just have to say, okay, well, for the purpose of critiquing this story, King is meaning a very specific thing that's kind of unique to him when he uses that word. And so when we say rationality, we mean Stephen King defined rationality.
Yeah, and it almost in this book means a specific kind of viewpoint on the correct way to build and manage society, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
I feel like when he talks about rationality here in reference to Flagg, he's specifically talking about the old ways of doing things, the old ways of understanding the world and attempting to control the world and build a community in the world.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. The focusing on specifically on like the rational quote unquote way of organizing a society versus maybe you could say the more human way of organizing a society, if there was going to be. It's interesting
Sure.
because it would be handy for me, at least in my thinking, to have a word for like the opposite of this rationality, because I don't think irrationality is the right word, right?
Sure.
It's like, well, no, because you can't govern a society through irrationality. I think what you govern it through is a grounding in human intuition and the numinous, you could even say, because
How
there.
do you always do it?
What?
Was that not a Numenor reference?
No.
Oh, I'm so primed for you to go Tolkien with this.
No, I'm gonna try to make a galaxy brain take where I call Numenor
Oh, okay, I understand what you mean. The numinous as in, okay, yeah. I'm just sorry. I'm just so we're talking about Rings of Power this week. I'm so fucking primed
yeah.
on Tolkien stuff. I gotcha.
Yes, just it's funny because I don't know. I don't have a handy in my pocket definition for the word numinous, but like the the unexplainable, the thing you get in touch with when you're on a spirit quest, actually,
Yeah,
would be a great sort of
sure.
extensive definition, which is exactly what our friends are doing, right? They're getting in touch with the numinous, with the greater than human, the spirit world. You could say, I don't know, whatever that is. That is the opposite of Flagg's rationalism.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. The thing I like to think about here is, going back to Insomnia, the ideas of the purpose and the random, right? And seeing if we can fit these pegs together in some kind of way. Because I think kind of what we're seeing here, perhaps in Flagg, is that he is and always was an agent of the random, right? And so this idea of more and more he felt an urge simply to act, to move, to do, to destroy seems to be, just the random being the random. And then, on the other side, we have, the white or God as being an agent or the prime example of purpose. And that's why we see these wonderful jigsaw puzzles of cause and effect chains leading to exactly how things are going to last. That feels very purposeful, very intentional. Now, how that ties exactly to the rationality as defined here, I don't know. That's really interesting because to me, I would say the random seems to be the opposite of what King is defining as rationality. If King is defining rationality as the want and desire to understand and quantify everything, randomness seems directly opposed to that.
Yeah, I totally agree, because you would think Flagg is a creature of randomness and chaos, and therefore the opposite of that is order.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, order to me seems more like what Flagg is trying to build. It's his society that is the ordered one. It's the Boulder society that are the dirty hippies who don't even have their phones working yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't break too cleanly in my mind.
Maybe it's a better way of looking at this is not, these are two poles at opposite sides, but that the world is filled with both purpose and randomness. And the problem actually is aligning yourself too much to one side or the other. That the ultimate of rationality is that everything is purposeful, that nothing has an explanation beyond that, and the random allows there to be some inexplainable things that exist in our world, and that the ideal is actually somewhere between these two extreme poles. And the problem with Randall Flagg and the Crimson King, as they have been presented in Insomnia, now this book, is that they seem to be, polarizing themselves. There is no middle ground. It's one way or the other.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to chew on that.
I don't know if that's right, but I'm just thinking aloud here.
Yeah, sure. I'm definitely not sure if any of this is right. I mean, I definitely like what you said about order being a component of sort of both sides, because like you could imagine the idea that like it's the problem with the world that was so bad that it had to be destroyed with the plague, it isn't that it was ordered, it's that it was ordered in a way that was anti-human
Mm-hmm.
and atomized everyone, turned them against each other, and was just a very destructive way of ordering things. You could have a different way of ordering things that was nonetheless ordered, but more respecting of human nature.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
All right. So we see here also that Flagg is worried. He's worried about Trashcan Man. He's worried about Lloyd. He's worried about everything. And so in order to make himself feel better, he does what anyone does when they're worried. They just levitate themselves, right? That's what you do, right, Matt?
That is what I do.
And this is, of course, when Nadine chooses to suddenly speak up. She starts talking to him. She tells him that our bolder heroes are coming, that they're already almost to Utah, and that they'll be here soon, and that everything he is building is crumbling. I love what she says here. She says, everything you made here is falling apart. And why not? The effective half-life of evil is always relatively short. And so the question we have to ask ourselves in this moment, as we see like Nadine's last moment of triumph before she dies, is where is this coming from? Like, how does Nadine know these things? Is the white, is she in tune with the white now, and the white is supplying this information to her in these final moments? Like, what is actually, is there a rational explanation for what's happening here?
I don't know. It seems kind of like that might be the case. I think the way that I saw it in the moment was that Nadine has been shown mercy by the white. She's been given the mercy of a quick death, maybe in exchange, she's been asked to deliver this message to Flagg. It could just be the case that this is what she wants to say to Flagg. She has a moment of lucidity. Flagg's kind of psychic grip on her has loosened. She has a moment of lucidity. She goads him, and because he's so reactive in this state, he just reacts, right? And it, regardless of what, I mean, I think the joke answer that I haven't reached for in a while is just ka. It's like, well,
Sure.
Well, that which ends up happening is that which was intended. And so whether or not it was Nadine or the white or whatever, it works, and it takes the winds out of Flagg sails, obviously, when it does happen.
Yeah. I mean, she definitely has been given some information that she would not have had, right?
Yeah,
like she knows that our 4 bolder men are on their way here, which is something she couldn't possibly have known. So she's getting information some magical way. It doesn't really matter how. I think you're absolutely right. It is this wonderful moment where she is granted a moment of lucidity and pushes Flagg's buttons in the exact right way. And in his rage at all this, Flagg picks up Nadine and throws her off the hotel's balcony and to her death. I love the text here. He saw the great smile of relief and triumph on her face, the sudden sanity in her eyes, and understood she had baited him into doing it, understanding somehow that only he could set her free. And so goes Nadine. Any final thoughts on Nadine, Matt? I think we're going to read a discussion question answer from one of our listeners that goes in a little bit more detail about Nadine and I think the female perspective on her as a character. So maybe we want to save that for the discussion question section. But what do you think about the end of her?
Yeah, I'll have a hard time totally saving the discussion for then. But yeah,
no, go for it if you want to.
I figured last week that Nadine was gone. We weren't going to see any more Nadine. We were done with Nadine. And then kind of surprised me because this week she got this particular kind of redemption, kind of similar to how Harold kind of got his own slice of resolution last week. Neither of these two characters got your classic redemption where they did something important to strike back at evil, but we did sort of change the tone at the very end for both of them to say, like, okay, as bad as the things that they did were, these are not evil people. They were fucked over by this monster, and and they both die regretting that in a way that you really believe, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
And one thing that our listener feedback that we'll read later, like Scott said, but one thing that was pointed out is that Nadine's torment by the forces of evil was much more prolonged than Harold's torment was, particularly if you grant her being orphaned and isolated to such an extreme degree as being part of the grooming process that Flagg was doing.
Yeah.
And I I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that as being something that Flagg had done to her. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure that it is something that Flagg had done to her, but it's something to at least consider. And then if you assume that framing, and you think of, okay, Nadine has been sort of calculatedly deprived of any real meaningful human connection for her entire life, except for this fantastical vision of this final cosmic sexual union with the Dark Man. Then you can kind of see why her whole psyche would wrap around this idea, because there's just nothing else. Like she's everything else, every other way of connecting to other human beings has atrophied. And it kind of reminds me of, you know, the monkeys given the wire mother who dispenses milk, and the soft mother. The monkeys will choose the soft mother, even though the soft mother doesn't dispense milk. It's because Nadine's a human. She's been broken, you know.
Yeah. No, you're so right. And I mean, Jody's feedback, which we'll get to in 2 hours from now, is wonderful. I mean, this is what I love. I think you and I, you know, identify on a very personal level with Harold being, you know, nerdy men who grew up with a lot of, I think it's fair to say, at least for myself, a lot of self-doubt and self-hatred at times. I think that's a character that I can much more easily identify with than a character like Nadine. And I think, you know, a lot of the women in our audience could, you know, much more easily and readily identify and empathize with a character like Nadine, and a character like Harold is a type of person that they've dealt with negatively their entire lives. And so like, I think that's really cool. And that's why having many perspectives on all this stuff is really important. And so I think it's very cool to look at Nadine from that perspective. I mean, I think it's certainly a tragic story. I agree with you that this idea that she's been primed for this sexual encounter her entire life is horrifying and awful. And what would that do to a person? You know, like I think we're seeing it. It would destroy them. It would utterly destroy them.
Yeah, and it goes a long way toward explaining this feeling of powerlessness that appears in the text, where I think last week maybe I sounded a little, you know, obnoxious, because I was like, what do you mean you're powerless? Like, you can just not do it. And maybe that sounded a little hypocritical, given that we had found it easier to empathize with Harold's sort of position, when really I think both characters are positioned very similarly. It's just in different ways. Anyway, especially just the viewing Nadine's whole tragic life as part of the grooming process kind of made it click for me. And then suddenly I was like, oh, now I actually understand what it means when Nadine says that she is powerless. It's sort of a lack of any other option that feels like it would work for her.
Yeah, well, and to prime ourselves for Jody's comment in a couple hours too, I think, like, how different is Nadine's experience from the experience of, you know, a woman who's told from childhood, you know, you're going to grow up and you're going to find the man that you're supposed to marry, and then you're going to marry him and you're going to be his wife and make his kids for him, and that's what you're going to do, right? That's your job. That's the point of your existence, right? And from that framing, it's a whole new way of looking at things, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So he loses Nadine, he loses his child, and he's pretty distraught about this whole thing, but he wants to make himself feel better, so he does what Matt does, which is he tries to levitate, and he finds, just like Matt, that he can't actually do that, because you can't actually levitate.
I tried so hard.
And this is what I was talking about earlier, that I think, and what you were kind of alluding to, this idea of watching evil like directly destroy itself, right? He's now killed his let's call him the Antichrist, was in Nadine's belly. He's killed him, not there anymore, and then suddenly he's powerless, or near powerlessness, and that's already happened, and our heroes are still in Utah.
Yeah, exactly. You just feel like basically within a few pages, the helicopters are taken out. The extremely important Antichrist son is killed. I mean, you mentioned Mordred earlier. That's the other Antichrist son that was killed before the final confrontation even happened, right? And you're like, oh, like it's over now, isn't it? I mean, Flagg could still maybe come out on top of this particular exchange, but he's lost his prophesied demon son. So what's left for him? He's just
Yeah,
it's a really interesting position for the story to put us in.
for sure. All right, so we move over to chapter 68, which sees us back with Trashcan Man as he desperately searches the desert for something that will redeem him in the eyes of his master. We get to learn exactly what happened to make Trashcan crack and set the bombs on all the fuel trucks and helicopters, and it's basically what we thought, right? He was, having conversation with the people, and suddenly in his broken mind, he sees the people back from his old town and sees all these people and assume that they're making fun of him, and reacts terribly, and just sets all these bombs. And I love in this text, Matt, Trash is using big words like redemption and atonement, and this is, I think, fun to think about, because he's talking, when he says these words, when he says the words redemption, when he says the words atonement, he's talking about to Flagg, like to earn his spot at the side of his master, the man he says my life for you to. But what if, like, actually the White has different plans for this kind of redemption? Like, he's using these words, but like they mean actually something different than he means, and his getting of this bomb is actually going to be a different kind of redemption than he thought.
Yeah. So I love that, and I'm gonna riff from there. I mean, I think the really, really interesting thing about Trash, and I think the most pitiable thing about Trash, is that he's not evil. He's Gollum, right?
Yeah.
We already identified this, and of course he ends up being Gollum, perfectly to a T by the end. He's a poor kid to whom fate dealt a raw hand. He's tortured. All of his bad actions are the result of that torture. You could even say not only is he not evil, but he's good at heart. It's just a kind of good that's really been twisted up to the point that you can't see it anymore. I would say one sign that he's good at heart is that he wants redemption and absolution in the first place. These are emotional impulses that only make sense if you have a basic moral impulse in your soul toward righting wrongs, and he feels that he has wronged Flagg and he wants to right that. Like, Lloyd never thinks about absolution. You can think of a lot of these sort of shitty bully king characters where if they had wronged their boss, then they would just run, right? There wouldn't be this sense of like, I have to make it up to him, because that impulse in and of itself is born from a feeling of guilt, which is impossible if you don't have an actual conscience. So all things, in sum, Trashcan is not evil. That's the tragedy of him.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you're totally right. The idea that his need for redemption and atonement is morally good. It's just, it's so warped, and he's trying to do it for the wrong people because he doesn't understand, and because of everything that's happened to him in his life. Yeah, you're so right.
But you could even say that, because of the way that this universe works in the story, wanting absolution and redemption is enough to earn you absolution and redemption, even
That's
if
true.
it's because he does. He it's not from Flagg, but he does, I think, redeem himself ultimately via his actions.
You're right. No, I think you're totally right.
Cool.
All right, chapter 69. We are back with Lloyd, who has gotten himself completely pissed drunk. He's realized that it's all coming down around him, and his friend Whitney Horgan is here to offer him a choice. He's going to leave with a group of people, and Lloyd should come. But Lloyd says he can't. He won't. And he says this, and I think this is really what I wanted to talk to you about here. But it's more than that. He's done something to me, made me brighter or something. I don't know what it is, but I ain't the same man I was, Whitney. Nothing like. Before him, I was nothing but a minor leaguer. Now he's got me running things here, and I do okay. It seems like I think better. Yeah, he's made me brighter. Lloyd lifted the flawed stone from his chest, looked at it briefly, then dropped it again. He wiped his hands against his pants as though he had touched something nasty. I know I ain't no genius now. I have to write everything I'm supposed to do in a notebook or I forget it. But with him behind me, I can give orders, and most times things turn out right. Before, all I could do was take orders and get in jams. I've changed, and he changed me. So, what do you think about that? Is this true? I guess is the question I'll ask you. Has Flagg magically made Lloyd smarter, better, more competent? Did that happen?
Well, it seems right to me. I think the more recent Lloyd definitely seems smarter than the early Lloyd, who, I recall as failing to understand rather basic things that were happening around him. It's to the point of comedy, actually. In fact, I think our take on early book Lloyd was that he's not intelligent enough to make any better decisions. He keeps getting swept up with these terrible people because he uh, is just not intelligent, and also he's a sort of a follower by personality. And then Flagg sort of removes the excuse of being unintelligent from him, and then I think that's the interesting thing to say about Lloyd is like when he then became competent, he chose to continue serving evil, which is actually what sort of removes that that excuse, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Previously, you could have compared him to Trash and been like, well, he's an unfortunate; it's not his fault. And then Flagg made him smart, and then
Yeah, sure, very, very possible. I guess my argument would be, how much of this is Flagg like literally, moving a dial up that is Lloyd's brain cells, and how much of this is just Lloyd being believed in to the point where he, feels like he can do something. Like what was Lloyd completely incapable of this, or did he just naturally go into the position of follower, the position of person that takes orders, position of person that gets mixed up with the wrong people, and then someone came along and said, no, actually, you're here you are, you're competent actually.
Mm.
And and more maybe like, but with him behind me, I can give orders, and most of the times things turn out right. Before, all I could do was take orders and get in jams. I've changed. Have you? Because aren't you just taking orders and getting in jams right now? Like, isn't that what you do here? I mean, yeah, like he leaves like the small minor management of Vegas itself to you, and I guess that feels pretty good that you like can handle that and are, dealing with that stuff. But aren't you just following orders and getting in jams? I mean, like that, like literally, to jump ahead again, he kills Glenn because he's ordered to, and like, like I don't know. I don't.
Mm.
I guess in my mind, I guess I don't want to believe that like the reason Lloyd is even remotely competent is that he was given magical powers by Flagg, and more just this is the result of someone thinking someone's in your corner and believing in yourself. And it's unfortunate the person that did that was the bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Honestly, I very much textually thought that there was a case to be made that he was magically made smarter. In fact, I kept meaning to say something about it and just not, because there's so much other stuff to talk about. But I kept thinking like, okay, this is like early book Lloyd had that moment where like somebody was choking to death on tape and he was like disturbed by their kicking legs, but then he decided that it was funny because it reminded him of a cartoon. Like very, very, very much paralleling him to someone who just is not all there mentally.
Sure.
And now he's, a competent, manager, right? So I still think honestly that there's something magical happening, but I think the wonderful thing about fantasy and the whole genre is why not both? That it's something magical is happening, but also there's a statement being made about the idea that the magic, you could say, is him being given a chance, except I still think that the point of Lloyd is that he's given the chance, but he squanders that chance, or he misuses that chance. He doesn't use it for anything good. He just uses it to keep doing the same dumb stuff that he was doing before, except with a higher IQ now.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And you certainly could be right. I'm not saying like that you're definitively wrong, but I don't know. I do like the idea that it's both. It's both. Let's just say it's both.
That's always an option.
All right, so we move on to chapter 70, which is another quick 2-pager that just confirms what we kind of already suspected. Trashcan has found a nuclear weapon and is driving it back to Randall Flagg. I like one thing I guess is worth talking about here is that like at this point, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? Like he's driving a nuke back to Vegas. Maybe don't expect it to go quite how it does, but like I don't know. Like anyone who hasn't read this book, I feel like they're just like, oh, the nuke's they're gonna blow up the nuke. That's what the nuke's gonna blow up. Yeah. That's what's gonna happen.
Yeah. I think I might have even had an inkling along these lines from the moment that we learned that Trash was scratching around for weapons in the desert. Although, I think earlier in the book you're meant to think maybe Trash is going to find a nuke, and then that nuke is going to be used against our heroes. As everything is obviously turning against Flagg, you start to think, oh, he's going to find the nuke and it's going to be used against Flagg for sure.
Yeah. I mean, but isn't it interesting that like we could just excise this chapter from the book, and then Trashcan Man's like sudden appearance at the end of chapter 73 is a shock. Like, oh, he's here, and what's that in his cart? It's a nuke. Like all the characters have that reaction, but we, the reader, knew that and knew it was coming. And this is once again King's kind of there's no such thing as spoilers philosophy here. That like in his mind, it's better that we know this is coming. And I think it is part and parcel of what you were talking about earlier, that we're seeing how much this is collapsing before our heroes even get there. Now we've kind of introduced the Chekhov's nuclear weapon that we know is going to go off. And so there's no question that that's going to happen. It's just how exactly is it going to play out?
Yeah. I just want to say this is a very, very short chapter, but I enjoy sort of the tactile, mechanical details of how assiduously Trash is trying to get this nuke out of this bunker. Right? It's like he's really tenaciously trying to do this action, which is going to end up destroying his master. It's very satisfying.
It certainly is. It certainly is. We should also mention, just so I can say it, so people stop telling me I haven't actually said it, that his call sign here, "My life for you," is also said by the TikTok man who pledges his life to Randall Flagg in the Wastelands. So there, we've said it.
We said it. All right.
I didn't ever mention that because I didn't have anything to say other than they both say it at the end.
And I didn't remember it, so. I didn't.
That's because I mean it's like it's a consistency, and I think King threw it in the Wastelands intentionally to be like, oh look, this is what Flagg wants people to say when they pledge themselves to him. But that's all I had.
It's interesting how the TikTok man can be compared to, the way that Flagg is in this book, where he's like a leader of what you could sort of call the Vegas faction of, that whole story.
That's true, but if you talk about this anymore, then it will determine that I should have brought up the "my life for you" thing earlier, because there would be a real reason, and that would ruin my whole argument here. So I think we just have to move on.
We just have to move on. I'm sorry, everyone.
No, go ahead. If you have something more to say there,
no,
please.
I don't. I don't. I mean, the next thing I was going to say was like it doesn't really fit that well because both factions in Lloyd were horrible. It's not like there was a good faction and a bad faction. So him being like the symmetry is not that obvious to me, actually, but it's interesting to think about.
I mean, it'd be a fun experiment to see, like, is Lloyd just what happens if the bad team in the stand wins?
Yeah, I like that because it is people living in the ruins of a post-apocalypse and living, like animals, being horrible, extremely sort of, cartoonishly horrible.
Yeah.
And the de-evolution of society and all these things. So yeah, you could imagine. I think that's entirely fair, actually, because it's just a few generations down the line. They've lost an understanding of the world that they live in, but they're still using, the speakers to pump out the music and doing all these things. They don't know what they're doing anymore, but they're still leveraging the destructive elements of the society that is left behind.
Sure. No, I like that.
Cool.
All right. Chapter 71 is another quick one. This is just Flagg sitting in the desert, reaching out with his eye. He finds Stu and the rest of his fellowship, which will be the first time we've seen Stu and Glenn and Larry and Ralph since they left on their journey, which is half a month ago for us. And I love that in this moment, like seeing these men actually coming, learning that this is true, that Nadine was right. actually causes Flagg to gain a certain amount of false confidence, right? Because he's like, oh, these men are just coming to willingly toss their life away. They're not coming with an army or a force. It's just four dudes walking along the road. Sweet. Which is of course deliciously ironic, right?
It is. I think even in the moment, even me not knowing what was coming, I was like, okay, Flagg is fucked. Like he's clearly being overconfident and stupid here.
Sure.
And now I can't wait to see how this is going to unfold in a way that blows up in his face.
Yeah. All right, so we move on to chapter 72, and at last we get to catch up with Stu, Larry, Glenn, and Ralph on their journey west. We learned it has been 12 days since they left Boulder, and they're not even halfway there yet. They're cold, they're hungry, and they're also kind of dreading the end of their journey, knowing what awaits them at the end. But also, there's something about just, being on the road that they're enjoying. I love actually this description of Glenn we see here early. This walking tour of Colorado and points west, as Glenn put it, had been the hardest on Glenn himself. He was the oldest, Ralph Bretner Sr. by 12 years, but somehow he had eased it considerably for the others. His irony was constant but gentle, and he seemed at peace with himself. Just a wonderful, wonderful description of Glenn.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn's transformation since the guy that we first met is the most remarkable of any of the characters in the book. I think I include the main characters in that. I now understand why you were so excited when we finally met Glenn.
Yeah, it's so funny because he came off as such an asshole at the beginning, something I never really thought about until this read.
Yeah.
That, oh my god, early Glenn is such a fucking asshole.
Yeah.
And it's not like end of book Glenn isn't an asshole. Like he's an asshole to everyone in Vegas, but in a righteous, effective way that I'm like, fuck yeah, dude. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful trait. He's still his kind of, I don't want to say pig-headed, but cocksure self. He understands the way of things. It's just his understanding has been transformed radically by the events of the book.
Yeah, I mean, he came off as kind of a pompous windbag, and now he seems like a righteous firebrand,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically just a fun Russell conjugation of a pompous windbag that you like.
Yeah, I love the idea of his irony being constant but gentle. I think that but gentle part is probably the thing that wouldn't have been there at the beginning.
Yeah. Glenn's clearly, I was going to say author self-insert, which is not really what I mean. What I mean is he's a way for King to say a lot of stuff that King wants to say.
Yeah.
And put through the mouthpiece of a character. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that's every author is doing that all the time, right?
Sure.
So it's just that, by having the sociologist to comment on what's happening. And a lot of that is happening in this chapter specifically, where Glenn is kind of explaining the meaning of this quest that they're on.
Yes. It's a great way for King to communicate directly to us, for sure.
Yeah.
So there's this part of the chapter where they find the Wolf Man, as they dub him, which we know is the kid, right? We see that here is the fate of the kid. He's dead, having done but what we knew he was going to do eventually, which is exit the car due to starvation. The wolves were still there waiting for him, and they killed him. But I think the important part of this here is we see that he has taken one of the wolves out with him. On his way out, he killed one of the wolves as well. And there's a part of me, Matt, that finds this section kind of completely unnecessary and wonders if it would have been better if we had just left the final fate of the kid as this kind of ambiguous mystery where we definitely know what happened, but we don't actually ever learn literally what happened. But on the other side, I do love this added part here where we see that, oh, he killed the wolf too. So this idea that, evil, and another example of evil destroying itself, of that Flagg, turned this evil on to the kid who was a bad guy, and they just killed each other. I think that the scene once again represents that, and I think it's good.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, even the him killing the wolf is him damaging the Dark Man in some small way in return, right?
Yeah,
that's one thing. I just looked this up from Reddit user Trumpet Cop, who does our cross-checking with the old version, and apparently the Wolfman is in the old version.
Yeah, so the part where we meet the kid was cut, but he left this last bit
Yeah.
open. And part of me likes that better, because like the mystery of, like, we see here, like, I think Larry gets a little obsessed with this, right?
Mhm.
He's just like, who was this guy, and what happened to make him, like, get trapped in a car by wolves, and this idea that the wolves just like waited him out, like that just did this activity that is completely unnatural.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
what is happening here?
it's unnatural and it resulted in their own deaths, right? And
Yeah,
I agree. It's kind of fun to think, okay, forget everything you know about the kid, just consider it as an isolated metaphor for the whole situation, where you have this sort of terrible example of these terrifying entities battling and destroying each other, and then you just walk by the carnage long after it's done.
hmm
Yeah, it's interesting.
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely enjoyed the section of the book with the king, or the kid. Sorry. I like that it gives us a little bit more about Trashcan, who's a character I really enjoy, but also fun to think about how this would have read, not knowing that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Also want to talk about this quote. It seemed to Stu that the days would go on forever like this. Glenn bitching good-naturedly about the food, Larry noting their mileage in his dog-eared cheat sheet, the 2 cups of coffee, someone burying yesterday's scut, someone else burying the fire. It was routine. Good routine. You forgot what it was all leading to, and that was good. In the mornings, Fran seemed very distant to him, very clear, but very distant, like a photograph kept in a locket. But in the evenings, when the dark had come and the moon sailed the night, she seemed very close, almost close enough to touch. And that, of course, was where the ache lay. I love this writing so much. I really do.
Yeah, I love the writing in this whole part of the story, this spirit journey that they're on. I think in one sense, this might be my favorite part of the story. It's hard for me to say that firmly, because lots of different parts have been my favorite in different ways. But specifically, this part viscerally reminds me of Sam and Frodo's trek into Mordor, which is,
Sure.
of course, I think being paralleled, which focuses quite a lot on like the mundane struggles and the friendly interpersonal dynamics. And, in the midst of this objectively horrifying, harrowing ordeal, with an inevitably tragic conclusion lying ahead, the characters are still doing their best, being bros. The same applies to, Lord of the Rings and to these characters.
Yeah. No, I don't think we've talked much actually about their interpersonal, like, just conversations, like the way they're just like ribbing each other, like the Stu like is constantly calling Glenn Baldy, and like they're just kind of just like poking fun at each other. And this happened before they left Boulder, but we see it a lot here, and like they're just being dudes giving each other shit constantly, and it is really delightful. And you mix that companionship, that friendly ribbing type companionship in with writing like this in the part that I just read here, and it just makes this kind of serene and beautiful, but also like with the idea of you kind of know that most, if not all, of these characters are going to die at the end of this thing. Like it's haunting still, and absolutely in that Tolkienian way, where like as the quest nears that, oh, these hobbits aren't going to make it, are they?
Yeah, that's the hobbits do make it. Our humans don't here, but it feels very similar. And
yeah,
love it. Yeah.
I also just like the detail of them like burying their trash. Like the idea that like we could just throw this and leave, right? And then like they insist upon burying it, actually, because it just feels like the right thing to do. I don't know. I really like that little detail. That this is their world now, and despite the fact that they don't need to do that, they're still going to take care of it.
Yeah, I like that. That's, to me, that feels like a part of the pattern of all the other sort of quote unquote pointless restrictions that are placed on the journey, where it's part of the sort of spiritual ascetic quality of what they're supposed to be doing here. They're supposed to be purifying themselves, and leaving a bunch of trash behind yourself does not purify you.
Yeah. We also learned, Matt, that you were right last week when you said that our fellowship was going to find Harold's corpse, and therefore someone was going to get to read his final message. And so we see here that they do. And the thing that I find interesting is this, like, Harold's corpse with a shattered leg haunted him the way the frozen grimace of the Wolfman haunted Larry. He had discovered he wanted to pay Flagg back for Harold, as well as Nick and Susan, but he felt more and more sure that he would never get the chance. I love this, right? That like, it's not as if Stu is like excusing the terrible things that Harold did, but he's more saying, I understand now where these things came from.
Uh-huh.
And while Harold is still obviously in charge of his own decisions and responsible for the things he did, he feels bad. He feels pity, and he wants to take out the man who did this to him.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily say that he's forgiven Harold, but I do think that he views Harold's downfall as primarily Flagg's doing, and I think that's cool, right? It's kind of cool of him, you could say. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just don't like. I just don't find it very useful to still be like angry and furious and resentful of the dead. Like Harold obviously paid for the crime he did, right? He died. He not only did he die, he died hard. Like, he sat there and suffered for days and then had to shoot himself in the head to give himself release. That's I don't know. Like, it's not saying like a thing like that makes up for the bad a person has done, but like, I just don't think it's very useful to carry that kind of anger and resentment. Like, Harold's not going to be hurting anyone else. That's for sure. So,
yeah. I mean, it basically just, I feel like Stu's reaction here speaks well of Stu. Is what
I
I'll
agree.
say.
I agree. So this is the part of the book where Psalm 23 is first really introduced in our characters. It becomes a kind of mantra for them as they continue on their quest, and especially as they get to Vegas. So it's worth talking about here, I think. The line they most often repeat is probably the most famous one, I will fear no evil. But we do have the entire psalm here. And I'm not going to read it all, Matt. It's long, but I just wanted to talk about it a bit because, this is, I think the most common one is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will feel no evil, for you are with me. So, I mean, what is your reaction, I guess, to the kind of incessant inclusion of this particular psalm in the book for our characters?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and this opens up the theology can of worms that I guess we haven't really completely gotten to, but we will.
We will.
And I guess we kind of are now. The part of all this stuff, waving my hands wildly, is that I most struggle with, is that this prayer doesn't necessarily mean that God's going to help you to survive. The prayer just says that you'll be granted mercy and that you'll, dwell in the house of the Lord, which means heaven, which means you're going to die, which is interesting, right? Because for my whole life, sort of thought of this as like a prayer to God to protect you, but it's not really.
No, not at all. This is a prayer a psalm that is most commonly sang or read at funerals. So it is not a protection.
It's a protection from evil, but not saying that the evil's not gonna get you. It's just that it's all gonna be okay in the end because you're gonna be in heaven.
Well, and obviously, like the shepherd sheep metaphor is very clear here, right? Like it starts, the Lord is I'm going to end up reading the whole thing, damn it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. Then your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That's another shepherd. And just you prepare a table before me in presence of my enemy. You anoint me at my head with oil. These are things that shepherds do for their sheep, by the way. These are all things, like preparing a table is that's how sheep are fed. Anointing heads with oil, I read, actually is obviously something that is done in religion a lot now, but I think in the context of this particular thing, they used to pour oil on like the sheep to keep bugs off. Like it was part of, keeping parasites and other bugs from bothering the sheep too much. So this is just shepherd to sheep imagery, which is very charged and important to Christianity and Judaism as well. And I think, it works here. Like the Lord, you are leading me to this end, and it's going to be okay relatively in the end. When you
have to slaughter the spring lamb.
Yeah, but they're gonna dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I mean, this is like, it like in the concept of eternity, life is transient and unimportant, right? I mean, like not unimportant, of course. It matters. It does matter, but like the idea that one of the big comforts of religion is this idea that like life is cruel and hard and unfair many times, and you could be the most faithful servant to whatever God you believe in every day of your life and still suffer incredibly, but at the end of it you're gonna be okay because God is gonna be with you. And like that is exactly what happens here, right? It's exactly what happens to these characters. But there is some sort of irony that the thing that they're chanting as to gain strength is a funeral psalm, is a psalm sung when people have died. They are singing their own funeral, basically.
Yeah. I'm still just reeling over your revelation that anointing of the head with oil is like a animal husbandry thing, because that was the confirmation ritual in
well, see, this is like chicken and egg stuff, right? Like did confirmation start anointing head with oil because of this, or was it just two separate things that happened to be true at the same time?
I'm sure someone knows, but I don't.
I don't either.
It's interesting to think about in any case. I mean, anointing with oil is an interesting thing, because it's like in the modern age, I feel like we've lost whatever reasoning there was behind Christ literally means anointed. It's like, okay, why do you anoint somebody with oil? Is it like perfume? Is it medical? What is that? What was that historically? You just mentioned the sheep thing. I'm just like, were there other things? Were there other reasons why people used oil that are just no longer relevant? I'm probably exposing like massive ignorance, and people are like, Matt, it's this thing, don't you know?
Yeah, I think one of the important things about that, like the reason why the sheep shepherd, like it's so funny because nowadays, like being a sheep is such a negative connotation when you're telling someone like you're a sheep. But the reason the sheep shepherd metaphor was used so often is because in biblical times, shepherds like seriously took care of their sheep, right? Like to the point where like not as a flock, but like at an individual level, like a shepherd would know every single sheep individually and would care for every single sheep individually, and they would anoint their heads with oil to keep them safe. They would trim their hooves, they would brush them, they would take care of them, they would like it was their life, it was their livelihood, right? And so like it's a I think in modern times the importance and the power of the metaphor has lost a little bit of a charge for us, because we don't quite understand the absolute devotion a shepherd had to their sheep. And I think that's why this matters so much.
Yeah, I forgot where I saw somebody making the point that like back in the period of history when these things were being written, there were literal lions in the areas where these things were being written. So the shepherds were potentially having to protect their flocks from giant fucking lions.
Yeah, and having a shepherd protecting your flock does not necessarily mean that a lion is not going to come eat a sheep every once in a while. Yeah. But it's okay, because you'll go to sheep heaven and I'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
So from here we move to our final bit of good old-fashioned Glenn Bateman exposition. Glenn is trying to answer the main question we probably have while reading this section, which is why? Why have them walk out this way with nothing but clothes on their back? Why not let them drive to Vegas? Why not let them bring food? Why all of this? And the answer, of course, is because. I'll read some of the quotes here and then we can talk about it a little bit. You think Mother sent us out here to have visions? Ralph asked. Maybe to gain strength and holiness by a purging process, Glenn said. The casting away of things is symbolic, talismanic. When you cast away things, you're also casting away the self related to others that are symbolically related to those things. You start a cleaning out process. You begin to empty the vessel. He also says the time span given for these jaunts was usually 40 days and 40 nights, a Hebraic idiom that really means no one knew exactly how long he was gone, but it was quite a while. I just pulled that quote because I didn't know that. And when I always read about Jesus going into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, like I'm pretty sure Lent is specifically 40 days and 40 nights because of this. And we're like, oh, it was just an idiom. We don't actually know how long it was. Like, God damn it.
That's very funny.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't have anything to say to that. It kind of reminds me of how the English idiom of shit, what is it? It's just the other day, where each of my children and myself have all made up a thing that the other day means, and then had to be corrected. Like, no, it just means like recently. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is tangent.
This is why language is so hard to translate and bring forward in time, right? Because like idioms and memes and stuff can lose their actual source meaning and just be like, you just take it seriously. Like you read something someone writes in a book, then he went to the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. And of course the logical conclusion to that is, oh, he went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. But then no, it's we don't, he was gone for a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I mean, so what we're seeing here is that, you know, our characters, when they think about it, they do realize that they're changing. They're not just dropping in weight or experiencing the benefits of exercise. They feel powerful. They feel renewed. Larry describes it as being on a high without doing drugs. So they're going through a transformative process as they're walking on their way. And that seems to be the point. So I think the book is telling us that Glenn is 100% accurate here.
Yeah, I think this is a really cool idea, this spiritual purification through physical trial. It's a very interesting theme. You could almost view the whole story as a version of this, where you know, Larry from the beginning of the plague is sort of undergoing his own spiritual purification. I specify Larry because he's the one who had this whole period where he was alone, right? He was alone for 40 days and 40 nights. Especially after his first charge died, and then he came out of it the stronger, right? He sort of lost his mind and was the wandering madman for a period, but then he came back together.
Yeah, no, I mean, what is the plague itself but emptying the vessel that is Earth?
Yeah, exactly.
I do love this moment though, where they find a bunch of canned ham and like they're really hungry and they're subsisting entirely off what they find, but nobody really wants to eat it. They don't like it. Like they're like, I wish I could eat these stale animal crackers instead. What's your take on this?
I couldn't make much of it. I mean, honestly, since you asked the question, I was like, well, is pork biblically unclean, and thus they're revolted by the idea of pork specifically?
Yeah, I don't think spam is kosher.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know. That's that to me feels like a stretch. Maybe it's just as simple as they're just so like spiritually strong and pure that now they don't want these like rich sort of decadent foods anymore.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's like this is me really digging for a meaning here, but this idea that it's so heavily processed and like this is about, moving away from that kind of existence into a better type of existence. And so like as they're becoming spiritually clean, the idea of super processed super modern technological foods are the type of things that they suddenly find they don't want.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like it's sort of an overwhelming taste, which you get used to because everything we eat is hyper palatable now.
Yeah.
But then later they eat animal crackers and it's almost like a religious experience for them. They're talking about how you can taste these subtle lemon flavors that they don't even remember. They're like, yeah, I remember the lemon flavor from when I was a child, but I just lost the ability to detect it. So it's like they become so sensitive, like you say, that it's overwhelming. It's just disgusting now because there's too much.
Yeah. I like that. Returning to a simpler palate in simpler times. And then they find a section of the highway that has been washed out, and all four members have to navigate going down and back up a huge hill of loose rock. And in the back of your mind, you perhaps remember Abigail saying, one of the four you will fall on the way to Vegas. I think the book does a lot of work actually to make you think it's going to be Ralph or Glenn. Those are the two older gentlemen that are having the most trouble navigating the loose stone. But of course, we know that is not the case. It's Stu, the one person that you said absolutely was not going to it be. Like, definitely not.
Definitely not. I mean, I think my inclination was, I think Stu's going to survive, and so he's not gonna die on the way there. And I was correct that he doesn't die on the way there.
Mm-hmm.
The misfire was thinking that implied that he wouldn't be the one that would fall. Um, so I shouldn't get any credit really because I didn't say this, by the way, but I
You
did
did
have
not.
this. I did have this feeling, this thought that occurred to me that Stu would get sort of taken out in a way that wasn't killing him, and I didn't know when that was going to happen exactly. But one way or the other, he was going to have to turn back, or he was going to be spared, or something.
Yeah.
And I didn't envision him becoming injured. Maybe I thought he'd be separated in some other way. But I fundamentally I felt like he was going to end up keeping his promise to Franny to see Franny again. Um, Everybody else probably not going to make it. That was kind of my feeling, and then I was just quite wrong about the execution.
Yeah, I mean, this is fun with prophecy, right? Because like,
Mhm.
you read back to what Mother Abigail said, and she said one of you would fall, and and you kind of make the logical leap there of saying, oh, you mean die?
Uh-huh.
But no, she just meant literally you would fall. And yeah,
Which
I think the brilliant irony that it is this fall that actually saves his life, or at least up until the point that we've read.
and yeah, I mean, and I'm slipping. I'm slipping, Scott, because they continually use the word fall in reference to Gandalf falling at the bridge of Khazad-dûm,
Uh-huh.
which does not kill him.
That's true.
So, yeah,
Stew the White.
exactly. It's going to be Stu the White.
So we see that Stu's look is broken. He cannot go on, and he orders them to leave him behind. We see that Ralph and Glenn seem to immediately understand that this is truly the only option and what they have to do. But Larry is here, and Larry doesn't like leaving people, Matt. And here is Larry's final test. We see here the text says, I won't do it, Larry said. It's not Stu you're thinking of, Glenn said. You're trying to save something in yourself, I think. But this time, it's a right to go on, Larry. We have to. Okay, Matt, this is a big, big, big moment for Larry. Let's talk about this.
Yes, let's, because I don't know if I've fully finished processing this. Wanted to talk about the idea of God testing people. It's obviously a huge theme in this book. Happens over and over. Clearly, a lot of what's happening in this book is God testing people. Abigail, certainly seems to view it this way. She views a lot of stuff as being a test from God. And I think we could look through each of our characters and we could consider ways in which they are being tested and whether they are passing or failing those tests. I think Larry, Larry's a good one to talk about. Larry, in a sense, the result is the opposite of what we might have expected, because I thought Larry's arc was going to be something like, Larry, did you learn to put others before yourself and your own wants and your own selfishness? And he has. And so you think, okay, well, that's Larry's lesson is gotta put others before myself. We have to stay with Stu. We have to stay with Stu. That would be passing the test. And it seems like no. The answer is no, it's not that. The test is actually, are you willing to put this holy quest ahead of everything, including Stu, including your own, personal growth and your own character arc? And that's the test. And it's interesting because I don't feel like what I just said is fully factored down to the truth yet, but I'm fumbling my way there.
Yeah, I would say yes and no, because I think you're right that the clear, like in a simple, straightforward character arc, the moment is, okay, Larry, here's the moment. You could choose to be selfish again, or you could choose, to do the right thing. And it's clear what the right thing is. And oh yeah, you did it, and we pat you on the back. And so it is a reversion of this. It is the idea that Larry was a guy who left people. Larry was a guy that was selfish and would find a problem and get the hell out of there. And he learned not to be that. And then here his final test is, okay, but in this time, actually, it's the right thing to do. And that's complicated, right? That's confusing. And I don't think it's necessarily, you should put the quest ahead of everything, including what you've learned. I think it's more, one of the things I think that the back half of the book has been doing with Larry is this idea of, it's great to learn from your past, but you also have to let that past go at some point, right? That Larry did these things he was not proud of in the world before, and he's learned from them and he's changed because of them. But that doesn't mean you constantly live in this moment of self, like, guilt and uh, just paralyzed by this moment. And we see that's what almost happens here, that like he sees leaving Stu, he sees even the idea of giving Stu enough pills to commit suicide, if it comes to that, as just reliving his failure with Rita again. And so he can't let that happen again. He can't. But sometimes that is the right thing to do. And indeed, we see here that leaving Stu behind not only ensures that Stu survives, at least temporarily, but Larry had to go forward because Larry has a pivotal role to play in the end of this whole thing, right? And so it's this wonderfully complicated thing to me about, like, you need, like, learn from the bad things that you've done, but don't be paralyzed by that constantly for the rest of your life. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, another way of saying that, Scott, could be that Larry finally learned to show some self-righteousness.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is exactly what we agreed needed to happen previously. That he needed to stop, flagellating himself over, this guilt that you can only be driven by guilt so far. I think we, at different times have both said, guilt is an important part of a healthy psyche. It means that you're capable of recognizing when you've done wrong and being motivated to correct that. But also, that can't be the bedrock of all of your good actions. You have to actually have that fire of self-righteousness in yourself, which I think Larry is sort of in the process of developing here. And this decision kind of helps him along that path.
Yeah, I agree. There's also a fun read of this that, like, I think one of the characters insinuates this. I can't remember which one, maybe Glenn. This idea that, like, they're walking to their death. And so actually crying off and staying with Stu here is a way of actually running from your fate and running from that thing you're supposed to do, and running from that scary moment. Like, it's a thing where you can rationalize it as, oh, I'm doing this to make sure that Stu doesn't die, but really I'm just trying to save myself as well.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if that's, like, consciously part of Larry's decision-making process here, but certainly part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think. Sure, I think it's in there somewhere. What I think about is it's over and over and over in the Dark Tower mythos. One of the most important things to accomplish a big quest for the White is to sort of demonstrate this very deep faith in the White, or in the mission, in the goodness. And here, the crux for Larry, you could say, is, are you going to do this thing that's been set in front of your face that seems to be good, which is help Stu, or are you going to do the quest, the mission, the holy assignment from the White? Do you have the faith to step over the broken man in front of you and do the thing that God told you to do? And by demonstrating that faith, that's sort of what levels them up and gives them that, White power, which is interesting because that's kind of a moral that I'm a little uncomfortable with, as, like, on a personal level. Like, it's just, for the sake of literary analysis, it's fine and interesting and all, but I'm like,
well, I don't think the takeaway. I don't think the takeaway is don't help that man with a broken leg on the street because God told you to go to church or something. Like, I don't think that's actually the takeaway we're supposed to take from this.
Okay. Well, I do think that the White is basically saying, are you going to be enough of a soldier of God that you can just abandon your friend because God told you to? It's basically, can you sacrifice your son Isaac because I told you to? And then you demonstrate that you will sacrifice your son Isaac, and I say, okay, never mind, Isaac gets to live, right?
Or is it that, can you demonstrate that you understand that you have such a small viewpoint on what all this means, that when I tell you it's going to be okay, go forward, that you will believe that this is what you're supposed to do, and believe that, whether or not Stu makes it or not, everything's going to be okay.
Sure. Because Stu could have been eaten by wolves, and and you could still say, in some sense, that was okay. I mean, this is the problem for me. Like theologically, I'm like, okay, but then just like anything that happens becomes magically okay because you end up going to heaven, right? I'm like,
Well, yeah, but again, like Larry, you are meant to go on. God, by the way, I'm God. God, did not send you to help make sure Stu is okay. I've got that. Don't worry. That's not you. That's not for you to worry about. That's not yours. This is your quest. This is what you need to do. You have been told that the only way to stop the dark man, the man in black, Randall Flagg, is go to Vegas. You have to go there. It's actually funny to me that none of them mentions the fact that Abigail told them that one of them was going to fall. And it's like, oh, just like Mother Abigail said, we knew this was going to happen. None of them actually says that. But
yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
None of them says that. But after they leave Stu, Glenn just goes prancing up the slope like a gazelle. And my reading of that was honestly that Glenn was like, well, only one of us was supposed to fall, so I'm invincible now.
True. Yeah. But I don't know, like this idea, the idea of faith is that, like, at least in the concept of this book, I don't want to speak about largely, but this is the thing that you're supposed to do. Believe me when I say you're supposed to do it, and believe me that when a thing like this happens, it is going to be okay. That you have to go on. You have to leave this man behind. And I got Kojak for him. He's going to take care of that. That's his role. Your role is to move on, as I've told you. I don't know. I understand, and I agree with you that I'm not like super like gung-ho about the specific type of morality that's being presented here, but I think in the context of the story, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, sure. I think in context of the story, it works great. I guess I just personally struggle with the ideas there. Sure. Which, since we're nearing the end of the story, seemed like a time to bring that up. Since
I totally fine with that. Yeah.
Okay.
I also wanted to point this part out just as more Dark Tower connections. Larry says, okay, we'll go, but tomorrow. We'll camp here tonight, and maybe we'll have a dream. Something. No dreams, Stu said gently. No signs. It doesn't work like that. You'd stay one night, and there'd be nothing, and then you'd want to stay another night, and another night. You got to go right now. This very specifically reminds me of that moment where our characters are leaving the town of River Crossing, and Jake really wants to stay to just help them for a few days. And basically Roland is like, no. If we stay one day to help with one thing, and then tomorrow there would be another thing, and then suddenly we're there for 3 months, and then we never leave. We've got to go, and we've got to go now. And so I think very similar kind of framing here. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think at the time, even Eddie, my recollection is that Jake was sort of shocked at how cold Eddie was being. And it's like, no, Eddie was just on the same page as Roland, realizing that they needed to leave. Yeah.
Got to go to Vegas.
Yep.
And so Larry passes his final test and leaves Stu behind, and our fellowship is broken, Matt. So we enter chapter 73, our final chapter of the week, as it sees our trio continue their quest forward, aware that their doom seems to be rapidly approaching. As we talked about a little bit ago, we also see that Kojak has left them behind and gone to Stu's side instead. We see he saves his life. He gives him food and the things he needs to build a fire. I think this is really important because what King is doing here is, I think he understands on some level that the majority of people reading this book are going to have a feeling about this moment that you had, that this real moment of like, wait, that's the book is saying this is good. What our characters just did here. That's weird. And what it's doing is very quickly drawing this picture where actually Stu's better off than everyone else. Like we have this moment where like they are hungry and cold when they go to bed. Stu is nice, warm by a fire with a full belly. He's actually doing better than all of them. I think it's very important to kind of avoid exactly that feeling that you were talking about of making this clear very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's a good point because, Franny's sort of the avatar of killer god, like this attitude of God being this unfair sort of monstrous creature who doesn't deserve our loyalty and our faith, which you can get pulled into if you don't see glimpses of stuff like this, where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute, there's like a larger plan here, and it's actually for the best in a sense that we would actually care about.
Yeah. And then what really is going to wrinkle your brain is the question of why Stu? Why did none of the other ones get to live? Why is it Stu specifically?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe we'll talk about that again next week.
Yeah, that seems like a next week thing because I want to see how everybody kind of reacts to these events. Yeah.
Sure. So Larry, meanwhile, is plagued by bad dreams. We see these dreams are him, trying to perform and being unable to adjust the height of his 9-foot mic stand to get the mic in front of him. He correctly labels this as an inadequacy dream, but I really like the part where people demand that he plays "Baby, Can You Dig Your Man?"
Mm-hmm.
He says, "I don't do that number anymore. I stopped doing that when the world ends." And then, like at that same moment, he hears his mom in his dream say, "You're a taker, Larry," and says, "No, Mom, no, I'm not. I don't do that number anymore. I stopped doing that one when the world ended." Honest. It's just like, it's this really wonderful moment where like Larry just went through this thing and it filled, and he made the quote unquote right decision, but it filled him with doubt, and he's processing all this stuff. This is leading all to his final moment that we're going to talk about in a bit. But I love these dreams. Like he's just this uncertainty, this insecurity is just so natural, and I really love it.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said. Once again, this final time pulling out "Baby, Can You Dig Your Man?" and how for him it is not a talisman of success, even though this was his sort of worldly success. It's for him, it's a reminder of his darkest times, actually.
Yeah, I think you last time it was brought up around Franny, you kind of gestured at thinking that this was, the personification of who he was before
Mm-hmm.
the events of this book. And I think that this is kind of concluding that decisively, right? That is exactly, to Larry, there is no difference between "You're a taker" and "Baby, Can You Dig Your Man?" That both are part and parcel of the same person, the same Larry. And he doesn't play that number anymore.
Didn't play that number. Love it. It's great.
So days go by, days with bad dreams and the constant feeling that the next day or the day after that will be the one where they come in contact with Flagg's men. And at last they finally do. They crest a ridge and find 2 cars and 8 armed men waiting for them at the bottom. I love how Larry feels as they approach them. Now that it was actually on, he felt all right. Again, there was this queer feeling that it was a performance, a show to be played. Which is absolutely what it is. And we'll talk about this more as we get to Larry's final performance, but he's the perfect avatar of this whole thing. I love it so much.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate, you get this feeling that their spiritual purification has really culminated in this moment where they come out of the wilderness and they meet these guys and they're just totally ready for this, that they're enlightened, they are prepared. Whatever happens from this point on, again, it feels like they've already won and they haven't even, and they've only just met these guys.
Yeah, it's so great because they're arrested right away, and then King kind of immediately shows you what they're here for, right? Because Glenn, like the first thing that happens is, they refuse to say Randall Flagg's name, and Glenn is just like, "You don't even say his name? You're too afraid to say his name?" And like it's so wonderful because it's like immediately like these 3 men have gone through the stuff and it's not that they're not scared, right? And it's not even that they're like supremely confident. It's just, I think enlightened is the perfect phrase, because they can look upon the situation in Vegas from this viewpoint of, well, this is all fucking ridiculous, isn't it? This is all absurd and ineffective. And I think one of the other cool things that happens is we see that these men are so confused. This is something that happens again and again throughout this part of the book, where people are asking them over and over again, "Why did you come? Why did you do that? You're going to die. Like, you're not going to accomplish anything. You're going to die. Why would you do this?" And I think that's part of it too, right? That's part of the reason of sending them. That's part of the reason of sending them the way that they were sent, is that this idea of this faith and love in Mother Abigail and the God that she represents is so clear and strong that this is the way people behave, that they on the word of just this one person would willingly subject themselves to this. And it's a faith built of not fear, like the one that Randall Flagg creates here, but complete love and trust. And that is the thing that none of these people have. And so the idea of that is so astounding to them that it kind of throws everything out of whack for them.
It's also the thing that Flagg can't understand, and he can't account for, and he can't prepare for, the idea of love. It's not part of his rationality.
And this is, to get back to the essential, heavily Christian influence of this book. This is something that I do remember when I was growing up Catholic, was one of the things we were told. I mean, obviously Christianity is very evangelical, and I never really liked the evangelical part. That always made me uncomfortable. Like, your relationship with your spirituality and your faith seems just like very personal. And I just never liked the idea of like knocking on people's doors and telling them, here's what you should believe. But the thing that I was told that I did like is this idea that, like, if you are living this lifestyle, if you are living the Christian lifestyle, if you are doing the things that the book and Jesus says you should do, you will be like this shining beacon for people, that people will see the way you live and see the type of person it creates in you, and just be like, wow, I kind of want to be like that. And obviously in effect, in our world, that doesn't happen very often, but this idea that that's what these men through what they've done have kind of come to represent, these shining like avatars of faith and love in God or the white or whatever you want to call it. And these other men look at this and go, wow, that's crazy. And I don't understand it. And there's something powerful in there that I don't get. I don't understand. I don't know. It's really cool to me.
Yeah. It's not a connection that I made to that aspect of doctrine, but I think that's a really cool idea. Just, showing by example what they could have.
Yeah.
If they made the right choice. Yeah.
So the three men are driven back to Vegas and put into jail cells separate from each other. And the next day, Randall Flagg and Lloyd Henry go to Glenn's cell to chat. I absolutely love, one of the things we haven't seen is Lloyd as described from another perspective very often. And so I love the way that from Glenn's perspective, we see Lloyd. Behind him was the shorter man who was not smiling at all. He had an undershot chin and eyes that seemed too big for his face. His complexion was one that the desert climate was never going to be kind to. He had burned, peeled, and burned again. Around his neck he wore a black stone flawed with red. It had a greasy, resinous look. Isn't that great? Isn't that a great description of Lloyd? I love it so much.
Yeah, it's very, very unappealing. It is interesting to consider that I don't really remember ever seeing a description of him from the third person. So,
Yeah. I love that his complexion was one that the desert climate was never going to be kind to. It's like, you don't belong here. You like, this is wrong. You shouldn't be here. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, he looks really out of his depth, which, fits because he is really out of his depth.
So Flagg promises to let him go if he'll just kneel down before him, which of course Glenn Bateman is not going to do that. And then he does the unthinkable. He laughs at Flagg. He says, "You're nothing," Glenn said, wiping his streaming eyes and still chuckling. "Oh, pardon me. It's just that we were all so frightened. We made such a business out of you. I'm laughing as much as our own foolishness as your regrettable lack of substance." And this is one of those things that, like, it is the culmination of Glenn, right? Like, it is the culmination. Like, this is what Flagg represents is everything that Glenn, when we first met him, was terrified was the inevitability of humanity, right? That we were going to pick up all the weapons and we were going to kind of coalesce around one central power that was eventually going to destroy everything over again, that we were kind of doomed to be in this cycle. And then by the end of the book, he meets it, and just by looking at him is just like, oh, this guy's nothing. He sucks.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful culmination for Glenn, I think.
Yeah, I think it's neat because the vibe I get is not like he's laughing because it's funny. It's almost like he's laughing out of relief and joy, because he's like, oh, this boulder has love and togetherness and faith, and these guys, they're just empty. They have nothing. This is not.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to lose, and now I realize that there's no contest at all. And
Yeah. There's
you know,
no way we don't win. Yeah.
he goes out like a total badass here. I mean, I think that the best thing is, like, you know, Flagg is basically coming here to sort of gloat over him and you know, just torment him, and then Flagg ends up basically, you know, he kills Glenn, but in a very real sense, I think he loses the exchange. He sort of loses power. He loses standing. He loses standing in the eyes of Lloyd, and also sort of in his own mind.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that he orders Lloyd to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he doesn't do it himself. He won't do it himself. That's not the type of person Flagg is. He sucks. He's the one that orders people to do things for him. He won't do it. And at first, of course, Lloyd struggles to do so, but eventually he does. He says, "Mister, you don't fool me. It's like Randy Flagg says. But he lies. You know he lies." And Lloyd says, "He told me more truth than anyone else bothered to in my whole lousy life," Lloyd said, and shot Glenn 3 times. So is there truth to that in your mind? That, like, obviously Randall Flagg is a liar, but was he being honest to Lloyd at any moment?
That's a really interesting question. That's because I don't just want to blanket say no.
Yeah, my gut instinct is to say no, but I want to pick at that before I decide that.
Because there's no, I mean, I think that's the insidiousness of, like, the manipulative sort of Satan archetype character, the you know, the Prince of Lies side of Satan, right? There's kind of a lot of different aspects of Satan in the I don't know, in the literature, in the culture.
Yeah.
One of them is the devil you meet at the crossroads, who engages you in charming dialogue, and you make what you think is going to be a really great deal, and maybe no individual sentence that this particular, you know, trickster Satan says is quite a lie, but altogether it still ends up being terribly misleading, and brings you down a path of trading away your soul for something that you never wanted in the first place. So to me, that's the relationship between Lloyd and Flagg. It's not that every word out of his mouth was a lie. It's that the substance of it was a lie, even though maybe the individual statements were maybe they were truths, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love it. And then, of course, I love this moment, right? "It's all right, Mr. Henry," he'd whispered. "You didn't know any better," which, of course, is Father forgive them. They don't know what they do, right? This wonderful moment. That he forgives Lloyd, which is the last thing Lloyd wanted. He didn't, like. I wonder, like, "He told me more of the truth than anyone else bothered to in my whole lousy life." Lloyd at this point has kind of given up, right? He's given up. He's said, like, he's gotten the opportunity to leave and kind of turned it down because he's too loyal, and he's just like, I wonder if, like, part of the truth that Lloyd is talking to when he says Randall Flagg is telling him the truth is how Randall Flagg describes him as incompetent and stupid and nothing without him, and that those are the truths that he sees as true, right? And therefore, like, he just feels he has no choice but to do this.
Well, that is basically what he says, right? When he's asked if he wants to leave, he basically says no, and the reason no is, "I'm somebody here. Even if this place is circling the drain and about to blow up around me, I'm somebody here, and I'm nobody if I go with you." And so it is a kind of truth, but it's a kind of truth that traps him. And it's a truth that does not make him better off, you could say, or you could say it's not true, because he is, even if he leaves Randall Flagg and loses his magical intelligence boost, then he's better off, actually. He's made the right choice, and he's going to be happier. I don't know.
It's okay. You didn't know any better. And so Lloyd made his final choice, his final test as well, and failed it.
And now I think he's broken and he's lost past this point, right? There's pretty much from now on to the rest of to the end of the story, I think Lloyd is done with.
Yeah, and the interesting part is at this point, this is when Flagg says like, "We may be going down, Lloyd, but we got some stuff we're gonna do before we're going down." And then I'd be like, "Wait, we're going down?"
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
yeah. So from here, things start to move pretty fast. Flagg has his men begin to construct cages on flatbed trucks. We'll learn later that the intent here is that both Larry and Ralph will be drawn and quartered. A fate that thankfully does not actually come to pass.
I was worried though. I didn't know. I was like, oh shit. Oh no.
Yeah, definitely. The next morning, Larry is awoken knowing that, or at least feeling that this will be the day he dies one way or another. I love what the text says about Larry here, Matt. I have to read this and we can talk about this a bit. Larry was lying on his cot, hands laced at the back of his head. He had not slept the night before. He had been thinking, praying. It was all the same thing. Whichever it had been, the old wound in himself had finally closed, leaving him at peace. He had felt the two people that he had been all his life, the real one and the ideal one, merging into one living being. His mother would have liked this Larry, and Rita Blakemore. It was a Larry with whom Wayne Stuckey never would have had to tell the facts. It was a Larry that even the long-ago oral hygienist might have liked. I'm going to die. If there's a God, and now I believe that there must be, that's his will. We're going to die, and somehow all of this will end as a result of our dying. I love this so much. I love the idea. We were talking about this before, and I love the idea of the ideal and the real becoming one in a person. Like there's the person you are and the person you want to be, and I don't think you'll ever fully be satisfied with who you are until you allow those two distinct persons to occupy the true reality of who you are, because that's who we all are, right? We're the person we are and the person we wish we were, and hopefully we're working towards being that ideal person, but you also have to be content with the person you are in the moment, because that's a process too. You have to work towards that.
Yeah, I just think it's a beautiful articulation of what it is like to feel and be at peace with oneself from the inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just love the way that is. It's very concise too. That bit you just read, a couple paragraphs really, and it's like just gives you this. It gives you that feeling of like being able to take a full deep breath. Like, self-acceptance is such a beautiful thing.
I also really love the idea of he had been thinking, praying. It was all the same thing. Like this idea of for some people, prayer is this extremely important thing that they need to pray to process things, and so for some people, it's just contemplative thinking. Turning things over, processing in your mind. These are two sides of the same coin, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And so Larry is pulled out of his cell. He meets up with Ralph, and they briefly talk about the fact that they know, or they've reasoned that that Glenn has been killed. And I love the reaction to this. This is what you were saying about like the confidence and the certainty that the book creates, and that our characters also reflect the idea that that it's already over. All these people are fucked, and our characters echo that, right? They say, bastards. It's almost over for them, isn't it? Yes, it is. Like in this moment, they are being led to their public execution, and all they can think about is, "Oh, it's all coming down, and it's gonna be real soon, isn't it?"
It's so interesting how King chooses to let us dwell in this feeling of satisfaction for the victory that we haven't even had yet.
Yeah, it is.
It's again, it's the diametric opposite of you could have written the scene where the two prisoners are let out and they're full of dread and terror, and they see the torture rack made for them, and none of that. I mean, just a little bit of that, a little bit of the fear of possible pain, but so much less than it could be, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're right that like the logical, dramatic narrative choice there would have been to mine this for as much tension as possible, and King is entirely uninterested in doing that. Like that it's not that there's not tension in the scene, as you said, but the tension is not are we thinking about how this is all going to go? We've kind of already come to the conclusion that it's over. It's over. Like, these guys, characters are going to win, and it's going to happen. And so we're not really sitting on that tension. And you think we would want to? You think that would make a better story to do it that way, but it doesn't. And I think that's, like, to me, that is so powerfully important about what the story is saying, is that at the end, if you believe, if you love, if you have faith, and if you stand, if you stand tall, if you stand true to the things you believe in, this is what it'll feel like, even in the most dire time. This is the good feeling that you will get, the confidence and the knowing, and it's not that you're not going to die, because we see they're about to die, but you will at least go knowing that, like, you are right, having that self-righteousness, as we said.
That's a good way of putting it. It's good to remind me, in this moment, that this is the stand. This is them standing and being true. And what do they really do? I mean, they just exude this sort of presence of confidence and faith and belief that they're on the side of good, and that's it. That's all they have to do, and they win.
Yep.
It's great.
Yep. So Larry is led out with Ralph into what he describes as the apotheosis of his life, which is, King really likes that word. We see here it's one last performance in front of a crowd, and he sings a pretty good song here, right?
Yeah. No, I love the idea that fairly minor note, all things considered, but the idea that him speaking out to the crowd is made all the more, like, clear and powerful because he has this voice that's been trained as a singer, so his voice just carries more clearly, and it's really minor, but it seems like, hey, well, maybe this is like one of the reasons why Larry was chosen, is because he's a singer. And I don't know, it's cool to think about.
Absolutely. This is what I mean when I talk about how the actual, like, beat to beat puzzle pieces of this ending really come together really nicely, because I think you're absolutely right. The reason Larry is here is because he's, one, not completely intimidated by crowds because he's used to them, two, very good at carrying his voice, and he knows what to say, and he basically challenges them. He says, we're going to die here, but you all know this is wrong, and we will die knowing that we were right and you were wrong. And his speech doesn't have enough strength to get everyone to rise up and overthrow Flagg, but it does cause one more member of the crowd, Lloyd's friend Whitney Horgan, to step up and yell at the crowd as well. And he says, "We was Americans once," Whitney cried at last. "This ain't how Americans act. I wasn't so much, I'll tell you that. Nothing but a cook. But I know this ain't how Americans act, listening to some murdering freak in cowboy boots." And, to be fair to Whitney, this was written before we elected George W. Bush. So,
ooh, burn.
Got him.
I mean, yes, that's all very good, Scott. But no, like, I just think, King has been clearly ambivalent about the idea of America, right? But in the end, it is this one guy and his sort of positive, faithful, hopeful, loving idea, idea of the ideal America, that drives him to actually stand up in front of the crowd. And that's like the final domino, right? Or maybe one domino away from the final domino, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. To steal the quote from Larry, like, there are two Americas, right? There's the one that we are, and the ideal one. There's the real one and the ideal one in America. The place that America is and the place that America wants to be. And this is the, we've talked long in this book. I don't think this book holds back, as you said, about what America is and the bad parts about what are, this is the country that created the superflu, that ended the world, that, the book was filled in the early pages with just, raking criticism of these systems and what they do and what they're capable of. But there is a version of America, there is an ideal of America, what it wants to be, that is channeled and summoned here. And obviously, like Larry's speech, Whitney's speech does not cause the crowd to, like, go, "Oh yeah, fuck this guy, we're gonna overthrow him." That's not what happens here. But what does happen is Flagg summons a ball of electricity and begins melting Whitney's face off of, as you do. But before he can finish, Trashcan Man arrives, and we see here, this is, again, this is what I mean by puzzle pieces, right? Because here's what happens. Flagg summons this ball of electricity. He starts burning Whitney alive. Trashcan shows up. Suddenly, the ball of electricity grows in size, and then electricity shoots out from it, hits the nuke the Trashcan is bringing, and explodes. And so everything stacks together. And yes, the hand of God appears, and we'll talk about it in a sec. But everything stacks together to make this thing the way it goes. If Larry wasn't there to give his speech, he might not have inspired Whitney to get up there to give his speech. If Whitney didn't get up there to give his speech, perhaps Flagg would not have summoned a ball of electricity to murder him on the spot, right? Which wouldn't have been able to set off the nuke, which wouldn't have, everything fits together. It's all connected, and everyone was necessary. All of this was necessary. And that's why I think it's brilliant. On top of being thematically resonant and powerful, I actually think that King put in the work to draw a clear line between what every person's role in this whole final thing was.
Yeah, just mechanistically put together very well, narratively. Yeah, I agree.
I do love that the detail that Flagg had foreseen everything. He knew how all this was going to go, and he had this real false level of confidence because he'd even seen that Whitney was going to stand up and do his little deal. The only thing he hadn't seen was the Trashcan Man's appearance. This was his for some reason held back from him. We don't know why.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think even from the beginning, I had this feeling of Trashcan Man is not evil. He is he an agent of the White? Was he an agent of the White from the beginning? And
Could
just
be.
a very confused, or could just be the case that in this one particular instance, this was a man seeking redemption and absolution, and so he was invisible to Flagg because Flagg can't comprehend those ideas.
Yeah, and let's talk about, I think, what is the most controversial choice in this book, at least in this part of the book, rather, is the literal hand of God appearing. So we have, and suddenly Ralph shrieked, Larry, the hand of God. Ralph's face was transported in a terrible joy. His eyes shone. He was pointing at the sky. Larry looked up. He saw the ball of electricity Flagg had flicked from the end of his finger. It had grown to a tremendous size. It hung in the sky, jittering towards Trashcan Man, giving off sparks like hair. Larry realized dimly that the air was now so full of electricity that even hairs on his own body were standing on end. And the thing in the sky did look like a hand. So is this, Matt, literally the hand of God appearing to grow the ball of electricity, and the White finally appearing in the 11th hour to say, congratulations, children, you did it all right. Boom.
I mean, it's I think I want to reach back to the moment where Abigail heals Franny, and Franny's like, is this a bribe? And Abigail's like, no, it's a sign. What God does is he shows you signs and then you do with them as you will. And in this last moment, basically it's a sign from God that's just saying hey, I'm here. And it's like, what's the point of that? I don't think there is a point other than a little bit of reassurance for Ralph and Larry.
So it's like the hand of God just makes a little and just just points at Larry and just
yeah
I gotcha.
Yeah, gotcha. You knew I wasn't gonna. Yeah, no, it's absolutely.
I think it's worth pointing out how Flagg, quote unquote, dies here. Because he doesn't. I guess he dies, but we see him first transform into a demon, right? And then he disappears, and only his clothes are left, and then he's just gone. So it's not like he quote unquote dies in the explosion. He just kind of ceases to exist.
Yeah, I feel like there's another time that this is this happened in the Talisman, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
did it? Who'd happen to in the Talisman?
Flagg. No, not the Talisman. Jesus Christ.
I was like, Randall Flagg's in the Talisman.
The one, the fantasy one.
Eyes of the Dragon.
Eyes of the Dragon. Yes.
Did he disappear?
They shot him in the eye with an arrow and he disappeared. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're totally right. Yeah,
yep.
It's true. Man, he's got to appear in the Dark Tower, so he can't die.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's an interesting sort of motif, right? That the evil is never actually destroyed, because you can't actually destroy evil, but you can defeat this
Mhm.
head of the Hydra, and
Yeah.
the battle is ongoing, and you can feel some satisfaction, but you never win the final victory.
Mhm. And then the chapter ends with silent white light filled the world, and the righteous and unrighteous alike were consumed in that holy fire.
It's
And
great.
so Larry is dead. Ralph is dead. Lloyd dead. Trashcan Man dead.
Yep.
Julie Lowry dead. Rat Man dead.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about Ratman.
We didn't talk about Rat Man at all, but
He's
he's
dead.
out of there. Yeah, he's dead. Sorry, Rat Man.
Yeah, we hardly knew ye.
So I mean, we'll wrap everything up here in a sec, but just like, how did this moment in the ending work on you? Were you satisfied by watching all of our favorite characters die? Was it still satisfying to you?
Yes, it was, and almost the least interesting part is the final moment of resolution, because of the way that everything built up toward it, and you had this, this feeling of calm assurance and acceptance building up toward it. I honestly did not see that coming. I thought a book called The Stand makes you feel like, maybe this is just me being linguistically dumb, but I was imagining it more as like a standoff, like a sort of gunslinger foes facing each other down,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's going to be awesome, and there's going to be action, and I really should know better at this point, because how often does that happen? I guess I was sort of imagining it being more similar to the ending of Black House, in terms of a standoff between good and evil. And that's just so far away from what this was. I mean, only in the barest outlines, where you have the bad guys and the good guys, and they're all there physically.
Yeah.
But again, it's the way it unfolds is just uh, feels very, very different from what I was expecting, and in a way that felt surprising and satisfying. And I mean, a thing can only be so satisfying if it's what you expect it to be. If
Sure.
it's unexpected, then that has at least the chance of landing differently and satisfying you in a new way that you didn't even know you were looking for. And I think that's what this accomplished.
Yeah, I think I will just tell you are not the only one that had that thought, that in a book titled The Stand, that a book that sets itself up as the final stand between good and evil, that they expected a more of a direct confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the argument I make when we've had this conversation before about different things is like, what actually would that have, like, what was that gonna look like?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're like our good guys and Flagg gonna like have a fist fight? Like, were they gonna, like, it's just like, I always go back to that central thing of like, I understand the desire to have that because it is, fulfilling and dramatic, but like, what actually would it have been? Like, do we really want to see like the armies of Vegas clashing with the armies of the Boulder Free Zone, and see people shooting at each other and fighting each other and killing each other? Is that really what we wanted? I find this so, narratively and thematically satisfying in just about every way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just brain poisoned from watching too many movies where that is indeed the way that it ends.
Totally understand.
But I think to just return to my to my bullshit, as a dog returns to his vomit. Like the climax of Lord of the Rings is not the army coming to the gates of Mordor to win a triumphant battle against the forces of darkness. The victory is Frodo failing to throw the ring away,
Mm-hmm.
and then Gollum, out of his avarice and brokenness, fighting him for it, and then the ring falling due to their own hijinks, which is such exactly the correct ending for that story, but simultaneously does not give you this thrill of satisfaction of like, unambiguous triumph of good, right?
The first time I read that and saw it in the movie, I was so mad, like, because that, like, and that is like, no, like that can't be, like,
Mm-hmm.
he can't succumb to the ring in the final moment. No, that's not fair. That's not what I want. It is, and it is, you're absolutely right, the exact correct thing to do. It is the exact right thing to do in that story, just like this is the exact right thing to do in this story. And it is just, there is something like, this is similar to the end of the Dark Tower, right? Where that is the right ending for the story, but it is also the thing that you just like, no, that's not fair.
Yeah.
That's not good. I don't like it. I want my endings to be perfectly satisfying in that they make me feel warm and cozy. And
Right.
watching Larry go, oh God, thank God, I will fear no evil. Like that, I mean, there is some satisfaction to the doom of Flagg, but like, that's sad. It's sad that it took the death of Larry and Ralph and Glenn, and like, and I find it wonderful, but it's like designed disappointment in a lot of ways.
I think the thing that all three of these endings, Dark Tower, Lord of the Rings, The Stand, have in common is that they contain a beautiful truth, even though they're not written to be awesome.
Yeah.
We got enough awesome. Our movies are full of awesome. This is truth, which is way more valuable and rare.
I agree. I totally agree. All right. So that's the end of Randall Flagg and the end of this week's reading.
Yeah.
We did it. We made it through.
Awesome.
So obviously next week we're going to read the rest of the book. We've got a few more chapters. We've got our denouement and our epilogue, and we're going to see how this book wraps up. We still have some unanswered questions, right? We still don't know if Stu's going to make it, or how he's going to make it, or what's going to happen there.
Tom's going to carry him back.
Well, we don't know that for sure, Matt. That's just your theory.
That's
okay,
my theory,
we have to see it.
Okay, but no, you're right. We do have more questions. I want to see how everyone reacts to the loss of our beloved characters.
That's and is Franny's baby gonna be healthy? Is Franny's baby gonna die of Captain Trips in the moments it exits her? We just don't know yet. So
yep, we'll see.
But for now, we have a discussion question to answer. So our question last week was all about Harold Lauder, and we got a lot of answers to this question, and a lot of differing answers. And to me, I don't know, Matt. To me, this is the perfect result when you have a wonderfully complicated character. That you have people who can't stand him and have no sympathy towards him, and people who empathize or sympathize with him even though they don't like him. And it's just a wonderful gamut of answers here that I'm gonna enjoy us really talking about.
Me too. So this first one we're going to read is the one that we obliquely referenced earlier, regarding which also speaks about Nadine. Nadine. Barry Jane says, I really enjoyed this week's convo about Nadine and Harold, and thank you for acknowledging the fundamental difference between them, their gender. I love Nadine as a character. She's been targeted by supernatural powers her entire life. She was isolated from those who loved her by death. She was routinely plagued by supernatural claims on her bodily autonomy. She was roughly the same age as Harold when Flagg began grooming her, but unlike Harold, her grooming went on for years. And she was raised as a girl, when girls are taught to be complicit and put others' desires, especially sexual desires, over their own. Harold was alienated from his family through death, but the grooming is less targeted. Everyone's having dreams, and everyone has lost their families, so he's not as alienated as Nadine was. And as a boy, Harold was raised with the societal understanding that he ultimately deserves the objects of his desire, especially sexual desires, simply by virtue of desiring them. They're both targeted because they're made to feel special. Nadine has been told for half her life that she belongs to one person and one person only, but she has to earn her reward through chastity and eventually evil deeds. It's not ever her he wants, it's her body, which feels increasingly distant from her as a person. Because Harold believes he's special without actually needing to earn anything, Flagg promises Harold he'll get what he already knows should be his. I never feel like Nadine believes she deserves Flagg. Rather, she has constructed a worldview where he selected her despite her unworthiness. And so she must constantly prove her devotion by presenting a body that's worthy to him. Harold, on the other hand, believes he was selected because of his inherent specialness. They're both self-delusional, but I can sympathize with Nadine's delusions more. As such, I have a hard time picking a favorite Harold moment. King's brilliant at evoking sympathy for even the worst characters. But after nearly half a century of dealing with heralds in my actual life, it's hard for me to find a moment I could say I like. So I guess I'll go with his death scene. You thought the Dark Man would finally give you what you deserved, Herald, and congratulations. You got it.
Absolutely love that answer. Really, really great stuff. We talked about the Nadine stuff a little bit already, but Pear Jane said it better than we could have.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's entirely fair to find his death scene to be the favorite scene, because it is a well done death scene where even Harold himself in that moment, I think, realizes that he deserves this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's always awkward to talk about, characters who explicitly suck and be like, I love this character. Because that happens to me pretty often, actually, where I'm like, what I love about the character is that the book has got me to sort of relate to someone who is super, super bad, which causes me to ask really uncomfortable questions about myself, which is super valuable, actually.
Yeah.
So
I love this character. I love him. He's everything. He's everything that Pear Jane said he is and more. But I still love him.
Yeah.
As a character, not as a human being.
Yeah.
Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, to quote Psy King, a coward judges all he sees by what he is, and save your hate for those who deserve it more. Harold was hateful and cowardly, and it took betrayal and being left to die for Harold to remember the face of his father. In my opinion, Harold got more than he deserved, similar to Cersei Lannister getting more than she deserved. That's a spoiler. Maybe we'll hold that out. I don't know. Do people care about spoiling Game of Thrones anymore? I don't know.
I don't even remember what happened to Cersei Lannister.
Still, it's a good parallel to Larry's story, as it could have been Larry just as easily at the bottom of that cliff. But Larry thankfully remembered the face of his father and made better choices on his journey. I can sympathize with Harold, but sympathy does not excuse evil acts. Just because you can understand how he came to make these choices, self-loathing, bullying, etc., doesn't excuse the choices he made. Some people would argue that if Franny had died of trips, or if Franny had chosen Harold, then Harold wouldn't have done any of these things, and that's bullshit. It's not Franny's fault that he made those choices, it's Harold's fault. Too many people in this world look at their life and say, I don't like where I am, I don't like what I have, and it's someone else's fault. We can't blame others for where we are in life. We're responsible for how we respond to the things that happen to us. That's the difference between having an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. Bonus tidbit, Harold as Hawk is no comparison to the coolest Hawk there ever was, Hawk from Twin Peaks, who tells Dale Cooper, you may be fearless in this world, but there are other worlds.
Oh shit, is that in Twin Peaks?
It is, yeah.
Fascinating. Is that a King reference, or is that just...
Tough to know, man.
Okay.
Tough to know.
It's Twin Peaks. Who knows? Who can ever possibly say?
I like this answer a lot, too. I like the external versus internal locus of controls, and I think that aligns nicely with some of the stuff we said earlier about the bad characters in this novel blaming external things for their problems consistently.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel you there. Cool. All right, Pastor Mike says, remembering Harold, aka Hawk, my thoughts about Harold get tied up with my thoughts of every broken and hurting person. Harold, like all of us, had every chance to turn things around. He had every chance for grace. He had every chance to make the right decisions. Ultimately, his character defects overpowered his pulls toward grace. The White/Gan/God consistently placed the voice of sanity in his head at critical moments, and Harold consistently did not listen. Full of pride, lust, greed, and anger, his choices led to his death rather than to an abundant life he may have eventually led in the free zone had he made other choices. Ultimately, Hawk's story was never told, only Harold's. While Harold's story ended with a final bullet on a faraway mountain, Hawk's story might have continued with a useful life in service to others, a life of fulfillment, using his unique gifts in service of the White.
I love that. I love Hawk's story never got told. I love that.
I love that, and I love pointing out the fact that indeed he did repeatedly have these moments of clarity and sanity breaking through, and every time they happened, he would not take the offered hand out of the darkness.
Yeah, absolutely. Next we have Felidao, who I'm not going to read all this, Matt, because it's rather long. But what Felidao has done here is they've written a short narrative here. The gist of it is that Harold pulls the trigger, and instead of dying, he wakes up once again back at not the beginning, but they basically what Felidao does is take the ending of the Dark Tower and make it Harold's fate as well. That he is forced to relive the bad choices he's made again and again and again.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Cool. Fun idea. It's like a whole page, so hard for us to read.
yeah, we're not gonna go check out the subreddit if you wanna read that. But basically, I think he wakes up mowing the lawn is the moment that he returns to.
Which is kind of neat when you have a character who makes bad choices, because it's like, well, do they deserve a second chance? And I feel like everybody deserves a second chance.
Yeah.
Don't you? All right.
I mean, the fun thing, that's a complicated question. I mean, the fun thing about books is that it's basically harmless to see what a second chance for those characters would look like, because
that's true.
They're not going to hurt anyone in real life.
That's a good point. All right. Walking Dude 22 says, let's talk about Harold Emery Hawk louder. I do believe that Harold is the most direct reflection of the author in this novel. I've always inserted old author pictures of Stephen King when imagining Harold. One thing in this week's podcast was particularly interesting to me. You suggested that Flagg made a stupid mistake in getting rid of Harold. I don't think that there was any way to bring Harold alive to the dark side. I mean that Flagg governs upon the strength of his legend, right? With this being accepted as true, let's examine the problems Harold presents to Flagg's legend. Number 1, Harold is Judas, the betrayer. In the words of Baron Harkonnen, never trust a traitor, not even one you created. Number 2, Harold is too self-aware to be governed long by fear. He has his own ideas. And number 3, most importantly, Flagg can never rule as a cuckold to Harold. Maybe there is some warped logic to that one little thing, but Harold has put in junk all up in the Queen's trunk. He has made a whore of Flagg's woman, doing everything but that one little thing. And that's just not the sort of secret that keeps. Still, Harold is not all bad. In the end, he dies with integrity, aware of the better life he tossed away. Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think you were necessarily saying that, like, oh, why'd you kill him? He would have been a valuable member of your community. But just the inherent flaw in his entire way of dealing with this stuff is that he doesn't see people. He sees people as tools to be used and thrown away, and not as people that can help build things. Like, that's just the way Flagg works, and that's why he failed.
I think you may be being overly generous to me. I think I did literally say he could have put Harold to use, but you are correct in what you just said, that makes more sense, and also what Walking Dude says also makes more sense.
In that case, you're just a dumbass.
Yeah,
Walking Dude is
fucking dumb
right.
thing to say, idiot.
Next we have Shenanigans, who said, I picked the wrong time to eat lunch while listening to this one. I think that's in referring to our pimple conversation.
Almost certainly, yes.
And if you're still here after that, thank you. As for this discussion question, it's been about 13 years since I read The Stand, so no clear Harold moment sticks out to me. But based on listening to y'all's analysis, I think my favorite dimension of his character is that he comes so close to getting it. He puts basic self-improvement measures into place, and people begin to like him more. It's almost as if there's a lesson there. But no, he's too stubborn, too entitled, too high on his own supply to move beyond his old ways. Yeah, I mean, that's a true tragedy of him, right? That he was so close that, like, it'd be one thing if he never even got close to realizing it, but to put him just up to the line and just, not able to take that final step. I love that. I think it was Sam that made the connection to Larry, and that him and Larry both, could have gone different ways. Larry was able to come to that realization and cross that line, and Harold just never was.
Yeah, we were pretty frustrated with Larry for a while, and we could have imagined him going a different way. So, there's an art to writing these frustrating borderline characters. Okay. Cassiopeia 1280 says, I kept expecting you guys to discuss the dream Harold had that foreshadowed his death, but I guess Matt's unintended prediction was too juicy. I do love Harold as a character. He's fully realized and complex and all too realistic, especially nowadays. I guess my favorite Harold moment is discovering that he is actually clever and resourceful while he and Franny are traveling. I love seeing him the way Larry sees him. It's like when you only know a person from what they post on Facebook. You get a warped, one-dimensional impression that doesn't incorporate all their flaws, secrets, and quirks, as well as missing out on what you can learn about a person from their nonverbal communication and body language. Harold isn't just a clever problem solver, and he isn't just a shitty teenage incel. He's both of these things and much more.
I think that's a great point. Although I will say that when I see people's posts on Facebook, I usually only get their warped one-dimensional impression that incorporates all their flaws, secrets.
Although that's not their intent, but yes.
No, yeah, I said that wrong. Basically, I don't see when people post on Facebook, I don't see their best sides. I see their worst side consistently.
I think Facebook is a different experience for everyone. Actually,
that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's the thing. I've had this thought many times that like a good complex character who drives a lot of discussion has to have genuinely admirable qualities and also shitty qualities.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that frustrates me, and I'm not saying anyone in our audience did it, I none of these answers have even come close to doing this, but I think that sometimes people hate the character so much because of their negative qualities that they like refuse to acknowledge the positive ones. And like, I think it's important to note that exactly what Cassiopeia says here, that he was a clever problem solver. That's part of the tragedy of him, is not that he was just a shitty incel who we should just hate unquestioningly. Like, he was also a really clever dude who he was smart and he understood things. And that's part of what makes it so sad.
Yeah. That's why you have to have some kind of circumspectness and charity when having these conversations, especially about fictional characters, but also about real humans, because you can have a whole conversation which usually looks more dressed up and rhetorically interesting than the following, but really boils down to, well, he's competent, but he's an asshole. But he's competent, but he's an asshole. But he's competent, and then and that's literally the whole exchange. Is like, I like him because of his positive qualities. Well, I just like him because of his negative qualities. And it's like, that's not a conversation, but that is basically what you see happening a lot. In out there in the world. Yeah,
again, and not here. I did not see that anywhere. Like, y'all have been fantastic and great, and I love that. Even though we hate Harold, we can have nuanced conversations about him.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Looney Tunes 56 says, I've read and listened to The Stand many times since its 78 release. Today, while listening to Scott describe the Dana Lloyd Las Vegas vibe or hierarchy, maybe, I realized that what he was describing was straight out of Watership Down. Oh, hey, we're reading that book. The Vegas folks were well-fed and secure, but scared of consequences. Nonconformance, ignorance of the silver wire, garners only ostracism or death. And that's great. And I just read that part of Watership Down, so there was no spoilers for me. Sorry for everyone. I don't think there's enough actual information in there for people to actually get spoiled by Watership Down. But
no, it's the kind of thing that only makes any sense after you've gotten there, which is the best kind of spoiler.
Yep. Looney Tune says, as for what I think about Harold, heavy sigh. As a character, he glides from icky to resourceful to mysterious to almost likable to detestable. I like to think of him as Joe described him: big white worms eating up his brain like maggots. Fuck Harold. They go on to say, it's weird for me to read this, but I'll just go ahead and do it. On another note, if you ever want to hear Scott rant about a character, listen to We've Got Worm Ward episode where he rants about Cradle, Chris, or Amy, then Harold Lauder in last week's Stand episode. Gloves come off. Yeah, I have some pretty epic Amy rants, don't I? That's very true.
Yeah, I mean, those are just three examples of worm parahumans characters who are exactly what we talked about, where they're interesting, they're complex, they have some interesting, admirable qualities, and then they are pieces of shit also, and it just makes for a lot of interesting reactions in people.
I actually think it like serves to make you hate them more when they have like qualities that you find endearing as well. Like that's why I go rant on characters, because like, you could be so fucking great, and you're just a dick. I hate you.
Right.
I think that's and they feel more real too. Like, this is how you do character. Right. This is it. It's here.
I mean, it's interesting because, like, I'm not going to say which, but 2 out of those 3 characters I hate. One of them I just feel sad for. So yeah. All right.
Which you'll never know.
You'll never know unless you listen to the other show, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Last one from Lemmy W. I read The Stand for the first time when I was 13. I've read it at least 5 times. The first time I read it, Harold basically disgusted me. He came off as needy, entitled, self-righteous, and possessive. I had very little sympathy for him because I only saw him as a pompous, know-it-all, self-proclaimed smartest man alive type, even before 99.9% of the human population was wiped out, with a major case of Napoleon syndrome. I cheered when he was thrown over that cliff. As I've grown over and read the book again and again, I began to sympathize for the guy. I grew up with 3 brothers and 3 sisters in 2 separate houses, child of divorce. So looking back, I could even find myself relating to Harold. Who can't who can't relate to being outshined by a sibling, even though you're clearly more talented, smarter, and all around just better than they are? Growing up with a step family, in my case, caused some sibling resentment when I was a teen. And I believe most teens grow up thinking they're smarter than they are. If I were only half as smart as I thought I was 20 years ago. That stated, I tried to put myself in Harold's shoes. How would I react? What would I have done if put in this situation at his age? Would I feel a certain kind of subtle satisfaction in having that girl that I pined over being the only other survivor in our little hamlet? Yes. And would I have felt being rejected despite figuratively being the last man on earth? Probably very similar. I'd like to think that the story, as the story progresses and Harold finds friends and companionship, especially after saving Teddy and earning the nickname he chose to go out on, that I would have chosen a better path. But who knows? I've done some stupid things when there was a good-looking woman like Nadine involved, like getting married. Plus, he was tormented by Flagg. My devils are persuasive, but they'd never try to convince me to do anything like Flagg did Harold. We don't know what we're capable of until we're pushed. King has a knack for giving characters like Harold a little redemption in their final hours. Do we forgive? Do we forget? Hard no. Do we pity him for what he became and how he was used? I think yes. That seems very fair to me.
I think so too.
And yeah, sort of the cringy but true aspect that I agree with is like, yeah, if I were in this situation when I were like 16, I probably would have felt a lot of the feelings that Harold feels.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too, and I think that's one of the things that Harold does very effectively is forces you to like look inside yourself a little bit and admit that, you know, like I too was a very insecure young man who thought I was better and smarter than I actually was, and part of my growing up process was learning that and learning, and Harold never did that, and part of that is certainly his fault. He chose to reject that growth. He chose to turn that aside. But like, yeah, there are moments in the story while reading it where I was like, yeah, like I think what is said here is so great, because like, imagine that the girl you've had a crush on for 5 years is suddenly the only person left on the planet. It's you and her, and you're like, finally. Like I never had a shot before, but literally all my competition was just wiped out.
Right.
So finally, for the first time in my life, I have a shot.
Yeah, this is a gift from God specifically for me.
Yeah, and it's not saying that like just because of that case, like Franny should get together with him. I'm certainly not saying that, but just like, you know, statistically, you're like, yes, this is my moment. And the immense disappointment at that not going the way you wanted it to. Like that certainly doesn't justify any of Harold's behavior, not at all. No. But you can understand, like I can almost feel the feeling that must have felt like.
Absolutely, yeah. And empathizing with his pain does not justify any of his actions, but there it is.
Definitely not. All right, that was the last one. Thank you to everyone who sent those in, and those that sent them in that we didn't read as well. We really do appreciate all of you. The algorithm did not. I think the only one we went against the algorithm on this one this week was Pear Jane's, because we wanted to specifically talk about what she said about Nadine, right? I think that's what we did.
I think the algorithm literally just actually randomly picked out Pear Jane's first. Oh, well, just completely
so wise.
If it hadn't, then I might have picked it out anyway, because it was we wanted to talk about. But the algorithm just obeys my will now.
Wow, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But that defeats the entire point of using the algorithm, because it's supposed to be randomized, so we're not influencing the picks. So
magically, it obeys my will magically.
Okay. That's fine, I guess. Yeah. All right. Next week's question, which if you're looking at the schedule, you will realize will be not only the final discussion question we have about The Stand, but it will be the final season 2 discussion question at large, because for our overview episode, we do a mailbag where you guys ask us the questions. So we will not be having a typical discussion question before the season is over. So this is it. This is it, folks. Strap in, because we're asking what your favorite character in this novel is. What is your favorite character in all of The Stand? There are many characters, some of them big characters, some of them not so big characters. Which is your favorite? And of course, we want to know why, right? That's the key.
Yeah,
why.
That's the real meat.
Mm-hmm. It's real canned spam.
Real animal crackers.
All right, folks, we are done at last. Hey, Matt, we only did it. We didn't take 3 hours on this. We thought we were going to take 3 hours.
No, not 3. Just almost 3.
Just almost 3. That is it for us this week. As we said, next week we are going to finish Stephen King's The Stand. So read those last few chapters and join us next week.
Yeah, you can answer that discussion question over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia, or of course you can send us an email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or hit us up over on Twitter at kingslingerspod.
And if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, the very end of season 2 is the time to do it. Because for no reason at all, just there's 4 more episodes, and you want to make sure you don't miss those. There's only 4 more episodes. Matt, what are you laughing about?
Okay,
I don't understand.
Scott. No, that's.
I'm telling the truth.
Makes sense that you would say it that way, and I guess I'm going to just pretend that whatever. All right. And if any of you like any of our shows, and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. We'd really appreciate it. We got some cool stuff over there. We just talked about a Stephen King adaptation a couple weeks ago, and that adaptation was
You Can Do It.
The Dead Zone.
There you go.
Yes.
I still don't understand why you were laughing at me. Look at the schedule. Look how many more episodes there are.
Okay. All right, Scott.
If you cannot afford to donate, as of course, absolutely okay. There are still tons of ways to help this podcast out. Please keep sharing it. Just share. Please do. And of course, you can always leave us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Gloom Patrol, who gives us, 4 stars.
What?
How's that? What?
You can go back and change those, Gloom.
Yeah, you can edit that.
I know that sometimes your finger slips. It's not a big deal.
That's probably that. I mean, that's definitely what it was. Like,
definitely.
Touch screens are notoriously difficult to use, and sometimes you hit 5. You mean that's totally fine. What do they say? They say just started listening. Is it too late to change the name to Big Coffin Boys? Yes, it's too late. Also, I just want to remind everyone in the audience that the book itself called them the Big Coffin Boys. It wasn't just a Scott mistake.
I don't think it was a Scott mistake at all. I think it was Matt correctly remembering that it said Big Coffin Boys and then saying that and not realizing that it wasn't like a motif, that it just happened one time.
That's probably it. So change that to 5 stars, because we are, and always will be right.
So are they asking if we should change the podcast name to Big Coffin Boys? Because
that's what I assumed.
Because we can do that. Sure.
I guess we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just do it.
Okay. All right, folks. We'll see you right back here next week on another episode of Big Coffin Boys. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.